and education and financial assistance and anti-poverty policies were already in place. We didn't have to get them passed. We just had to get people to fill out the forms.
Ida Kohlschreiber did the paperwork, and with help, she can now afford to put a little extra food on the table.
It's worth of your time to find out. Thank you very much.
In Koreatown, Gil Reyes for LA This Week.
To find out if you qualify for the tax credit, call LA County's 211 helpline. You can also log on to the EITC website to find over 100 free tax preparation sites. And when it comes to accessing public aid and even resources like free tax preparation help, residents can sometimes find themselves mired in government red tape. But a new anti-poverty center in the Westlake Pico Union community hopes to change all that.
Central City Neighborhood Partners, or CCNP, along with its partner agencies, celebrated the grand opening of the Family Source Center located at 501 South Bixel Street. The new center will serve more than 2,000 residents in the Westlake Pico Union community, which has some of the highest poverty rates in the city of Los Angeles.
The goal is to reduce poverty by providing programs and family support systems that will move families from poverty to economic self-sufficiency.
The Family Source Center serves as a one-stop shop location where Los Angeles City residents who meet the city's income level guidelines can apply for all the public benefits for which they are eligible without having to go from place to place.
We house here over 20 partner organizations that are co-located here either full-time or on a part-time basis, providing services from house screenings, case management, tutoring.
Este tipo de eventos? Because she likes it that they do these kinds of events. Para que estemos informados de todos los programas que hay. So we can know every single thing of the programs that are good for us.
The Westlake Pico Union Family Source Center is as much about helping out families in need as it is about giving the youth a leg up. Giving kids resources to achieve academic success, health, and wellness is another one of the center's missions.
We're here every day. We try to put in as many hours as we can, help out with as many programs for the community. So we just show our support for CCNP and what they're doing.
The new center was made possible through a $1 million grant from the City of Los Angeles' Community Development Department Family Source System and the help of existing partner resources.
Councilmember Ed Reyes, who attended the ribbon cutting, said he is proud to have CCNP represent his district in leading the city's anti-poverty initiative. Turning to a story about one of the most iconic landmarks in Los Angeles and perhaps even in the country, the Hollywood sign. Recently, that famous sign was covered up to send an urgent message to developers. Anna Marcos explains.
Picture the Hollywood sign with mansions behind it. Not a pretty sight. But it could happen if the owners of Cahuenga Peak, the mountain to the west of the sign, sell to developers. City leaders and conservationists have launched a campaign to save the peak, even draping the motto over the Hollywood sign for a few days last week. But a deadline to raise funds is looming.
In the United States, you could say the Statue of Liberty, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Hollywood sign. Those are iconic symbols recognized around the world. If we allow it to be built on, which could happen, we would certainly do ourselves and future generations a disservice because it's such a beautiful mountain.
2 years ago, the peak was up for sale for $22 million, but didn't sell. Now, thanks to the real estate bust, the conservationist group, the Trust for Public Lands, has an option to buy the peak for only $12.5 million. So far, it's raised more than half the money, with about $5.5 million to go before its option runs out April 14th.
Our organization is about land for people. People who want to hike, people who want to enjoy views of all over LA, people who care about habitat. We've secured commitments up to about $7 million. We have a lead gift from Tiffany & Company Foundation for $1 million.
The appeal to raise funds has received a worldwide response from former visitors, Hollywood bigwigs, and residents alike. Everyone, it seems, wants to see the sign and the view preserved as it is.
No way they're going to build these mansions up here. It's not going to happen. Nobody's going to put up with it. It'll ruin the neighborhood. It's ridiculous.
We have 2 months. We've been given one opportunity, and this is our opportunity.
Anyone who wants to donate to Save the Peak can visit www.savehollywoodland.org. I'm Anna Marcos for LA This Week.
The Trust for Public Land has bought up such natural treasures as Walden Pond, made famous by writer-philosopher Henry David Thoreau. It also bought up the Chinatown cornfields in L.A. If it buys the Cahuenga Peak, it will donate the peak to the city. And the last update we received says $4.5 million still need to be raised. And also in Hollywood, a brand new hotel and residence opens its doors. Mike Kaufman reports.
A star-studded ribbon cutting for the newly opened $350 million W Hollywood Hotel. Nearly 10 years to build, the hotel is just part of a much larger revitalization project.
Everything from a Trader Joe's market that's opening here, 500 permanent jobs, new restaurants, but also affordable apartments that will be for low-income individuals for decades to come.
The complex at Hollywood and Vine also has middle-class apartments and luxury condos, some with a price tag of $7 million. City Council President Eric Garcetti sees the W as a win-win for the local economy.
The city only put in $6 million to leverage more than $600 million in the project. So it's a great use of public money to leverage what we estimate will be hundreds of millions of dollars of tax revenues that help us keep the lights on, hire police officers, have our fire stations open, and have economic activity where people have jobs.
Late-night host Jimmy Kimmel emceed the grand opening of the hotel, which will likely have an interesting mix of tourists, common folk, and Hollywood stars.
This really represents the second golden age of Hollywood, a place where no matter what your income level, no matter where you come from, there's something for you here.
Sleek and sophisticated, the W represents the changing face of Hollywood. In Hollywood, I'm Mike Kaufman for LA This Week.
The W Hotel has more than 300 rooms, ranging in price from $200 to $2,000. Weeks after the devastating earthquake in Haiti, Angelenos continue to do their part to contribute to a country in need. Rasha Goel has more on how local artists are spreading the message of giving back.
Artists from across Los Angeles donated their creativity to help raise funds for Haiti victims. Haitian Relief LA, a coalition of various organizations working with LA's arts communities, hosted a concert to raise money for badly needed supplies. The event took place at Echo Park in Councilman Eric Garcetti's district.
Hey, Mr. Music, so sounds good to me. I can't refuse it. What you me's gotta be.
And I look at this as an opportunity for us to work with Haiti and to start to build the infrastructure by working with children and giving them the gift of music and art.
For some, the devastation has hit close to home, and being here is a way to help give back.
I have a lot of families in Haiti that's so far to hear. We hear from them. I call them every other day, but there's some that didn't make it.
Titled The Gift of Music and Art for Haiti, this event featured artists in music, painting, dance, and much more.
I've been married to Haitian women for 20 years, 20 or more. Been many times to Haiti, know the place very well, and so it was natural to try to do something to raise money.
Hopes are that through music and art, Angelenos can provide some healing and help to those in need a world away. From Los Angeles, I'm Rasha Goel for LA This Week.
After a 2-year investigation, LAPD officials put a stop to a commercial theft ring responsible for millions of dollars in stolen merchandise. But they still need the public's help to close the case. Rasha Goel has more.
This is just some of the stolen luxury merchandise that was recently recovered by the LAPD. Authorities say the items, valued at a total of $3 million, were stolen by an employee from a Saks department store to then be resold on the black market. According to LAPD officials, 9 suspects were involved in this organized theft ring.
He was rerouting merchandise, high-end merchandise that was scheduled to be shipped to the stores to a residence from Beverly Hills to a Los Angeles residence.
As well as 3 other residences in Norwalk, La Mirada, and Bellflower. From these residences, the merchandise would then be distributed to be resold.
During the course of the investigations, one of the suspects led detectives to locations where stolen merchandise was being distributed and later resold on the black market. Detectives conducted search warrants on those locations and recovered over $96,000 in cash and stolen merchandise valued at almost $2.4 million.
In my 28 years of being a cop, I've never seen as much stuff as we did with these 4 locations.
As of January of this year, 7 of the 9 suspects have been arrested. 2 suspects, a husband and wife team, still remain at large.
That's Beatrice and Jose de Jesus Carrera. So anybody, we're asking for the public's help, anybody who has information on the whereabouts of these two subjects, we would certainly appreciate any cooperation we can get in that regard.
Authorities say suspects also swindled an estimated $500,000 in gift cards and gift certificates. In downtown, I'm Rasha Goel for LA This Week.
If you have any information that could help the police, contact the Cargo Hijack Unit at 213-485-2507. A former LAPD chief is diagnosed with cancer. A sock drive for the homeless and some homes in One Valley community receive a historic designation. These stories and more in City Beat.
Former Los Angeles Police Chief Daryl Gates is reported to be receiving treatment for bladder cancer, which has spread to part of the bone structure near his hip. Police Chief Charlie Beck told reporters he visited the 83-year-old Gates at a hospital. Retired LAPD Captain Steve Gates says his brother, who was hospitalized for a few weeks, is due to receive radiation treatment to eradicate the bone cancer, which will be followed by chemotherapy to treat a malignant tumor in his bladder. The Mayor's Office of the Census has launched a month-long Make the Homeless Count sock drive. Donated socks will support the U.S. Census Bureau's homeless enumeration program. The donated socks will be distributed at 6 events across the city on March 30th, the second day of the census homeless count. According to the Los Angeles Housing Services Authority, nearly 25,000 people are homeless in the city of LA on any given night. The idea behind the sock drive, by providing a basic need like socks, city leaders hope to reach out to one of the hardest to count communities in America. For a complete list of drop-off locations or to host a sock drive, visit www.lacounts2010.org. The LA City Council has approved an ordinance to preserve historic homes built in 1963 in the neighborhood known as Balboa Highlands in Granada Hills in Councilmember Greg Smith's council district. The approval means the tract of 108 homes designed by noted modernist home builder Joseph Eichler is now considered a historic preservation overlay zone. The Balboa Highlands neighborhood of roughly 100 homes was built by Eichler between 1963 and 1964 and is located at the northern edge of the San Fernando Valley. The Los Angeles Convention Center recently played host to the two-day 34th annual Home Remodeling and Decorating Show. At a time when the economy is slow, a show like this brings a huge boost to exhibitors trying to sell their wares. Whether it's home improvement for the outside or inside of your house, the home show had it all, from building materials to landscaping ideas to tiles and countertops. According to the home show organizers, 98% of attendees to home shows held nationwide are homeowners with an average household income of $150,000.
It'll be that much harder to come up with excuses not to work out if you are a resident of South Los Angeles. New fitness zones are coming to area parks in the community, and they're aimed at getting folks in shape free of charge.
This woman is spending some quality time on an elliptical machine and taking in the outside air. That's because she's not in a gym, but at a park. South Park Recreation Center in South LA, to be exact. The so-called fitness zone is the first of 6 to be erected at South Los Angeles parks by Kaiser Permanente and its community partners.
And you can work out while the kids are playing basketball or soccer. So getting in shape has never been easier. Obesity and diabetes and hypertension, they continue to be a problem for us in our community. So we have to do our part to fight obesity by encouraging healthy activities and offering options like these fitness zones.
The Trust for Public Land was awarded $900,000 in grants from Kaiser Permanente for park planning, acquisition, and advocacy. The money also went to develop and install the 30 all-weather equipment fitness zones designed to promote free access to physical activity in low-income areas.
Kaiser is about total health and prevention, and we enjoy this opportunity to give back to the community and to see healthier people.
And everyone's welcome to give the fitness zone a try. In fact, the general manager of the city's Department of Recreation and Parks got a personal invitation.
One of you even had the audacity to say, John, we want you to get in there and break a sweat. Look, if I went in there, I'd break more than a sweat, especially with those ladies in there who are just, I can't believe the energy that this community and that group has.
Energy that seems now to be focused on staying active and getting fit.
The Community Redevelopment Agency also played a big role in this project. Fitness equipment has also been installed at Sycamore Grove Park, with 12 more in the pipeline throughout the city, and that's in addition to the 6 in South LA. And in this week's list of things to do, 2 community cleanup events and discovering Chinatown like never before.
If you live in the North Hollywood area and want to help lend a hand to spruce up your community, join Councilman Tom LaBonge's office on Saturday, February 27th from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. for a community cleanup. Meet at the NoHo Bid office at 5026 Lankershim Boulevard. The area being beautified will be the area between Magnolia Boulevard and Camarillo Street and Tahunga Avenue and Vineland Avenue. For additional information, call Alice Roth at 818-755-7630. And Council President Eric Garcetti's office won't be outdone. They're also planning a neighborhood beautification event of their own on the same day in Echo Park. Interested volunteers should meet at the Walgreens parking lot in Echo Park at the northwest corner of Sunset Boulevard and Echo Park Avenue at 8:45 a.m. for refreshments. The cleanup is expected to last 2 hours. Contact Alejandra Maraquin at 323-957-4500 for more information. Instead of on the first Saturday of the month, the Undiscovered Chinatown walking tour is taking place the last Saturday of February on the 27th in conjunction with the Firecracker 5K 10K walk run. Interested participants need to meet at Thien Hao Temple, located at 750 to 756 North Yale Street at 10 a.m. The tour will go until 12:30 p.m. The 2.5-hour walking tour will take visitors to a number of off-the-beaten-track points of interest, including a temple, an herbal shop, art galleries, antique stores, and more. The tour runs $20 per person. Reservations can be made by calling the Chinatown Business Improvement District at 213-680-0243. And that's a look at some upcoming things to do.
Think of it as an annual census that's just for the birds. We're talking about the great backyard bird count that takes place annually in North America. And at Echo Park, bird watchers are making sure our local birds count.
The great blue herons take over the skies above Echo Park Lake. The herons and many other species of birds are regulars at the lake. And during this year's annual Great Backyard Bird Count, sponsored by the National Audubon Society and the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology, these and other species of birds were counted and documented online. And who's counting the birds? Here at Echo Park Lake, that person is Judy Raskin.
In some years we see as many as 35. In some years we may not see as maybe 15 or so. And after we do a tally of the different species, I'll go home and I'll go online and I'll go to the entry form and I will post the findings.
The findings are then combined with that of tens of thousands of bird watchers throughout the United States and Canada, doing the same thing in their backyards, schoolyards, and office parks. Here at Echo Park Lake, Raskin is the unofficial team leader of a bird count team that in some years consists of 2 other bird watchers and in other years 20. But regardless, Raskin is always there counting the birds.
The most frequent visitors are American coots, mallards, Canada geese. We have a whole colony of great blue herons that are nesting here at this time, black-crowned night herons, American widgeons. Oh, well, let me think. Rock pigeons, of course. Where would you be without them? Gulls, western gulls in particular, and the others we'll see as we go around.
And for avid bird watchers and even recreational ones, there's just something about birds that brings on a smile.
The park geese, when they have chicks, it's like a big production. I remember the first time they paraded their little chicks off the island over there, and it was just like such a production. It's like they just announced like we're coming across. So yeah, it's fun. It's fun to see the chicks, and everybody comes out and feeds the birds.
And perhaps one newcomer to bird watching put it best when explaining just why people are so fascinated by birds.
Because they are of our world, but in a world apart, where they get to go wherever they want.
For more information on the bird count or about birds that could be living in your area, go to www.birdcount.org. And that's going to do it for this edition. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ellen Chang. A reminder that you can catch us online at lacityview.org. We'll see you back here next week for more of LA This Week.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Los Angeles City Council meeting for Tuesday, the 23rd of February, 2010. We're here in the John Farrell Council Chambers, room 340 of City Hall. We meet here every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, though we are meeting these days during the budget on Mondays and Thursdays as well at 10 a.m. Welcome to our folks who are here in council chambers, as well as our guests who have joined us in our remote council chambers in Van Nuys and in San Pedro. Our viewers on Channel 35, which is a convenient way to catch our council meetings both live and rebroadcast each evening throughout the city's cable system. We welcome you as well. And finally, for your convenience, we're available two other ways online. Through our city's homepage at lacity.org, where we have live streaming webcasts of our council meetings. We also archive our past council meetings there. And through your telephone at 213-621-CITY. That's 213-621-CITY, and you can dial in and through the prompts listen to the full council meeting or any of our committee meetings as well. Our agendas are also available in person here or online at lacity.org or through our city clerk's office. Those are made available 72 hours in advance for our regular agenda items and 24 hours in advance for our special meeting items. If you'd like to be heard on any of the items that have not yet had a public hearing, please fill out a speaker card here or in Van Nuys and San Pedro, and we'd be happy to hear your comments on items that have not yet had a public hearing. You can also fill out cards for items that have had a public hearing, though that requires a council member to reopen the public hearing to be heard further. We also have a section for general public comment, which is right here in front of us. That's 2 minutes per person is the standard right now, and if anybody wishes to be heard for general public comment for items not on our agenda but under our jurisdiction, we'd be most happy to hear that as well. We do have a quorum, so Mr. Clerk, if you'll please call roll.
Alarcon, Cardenas, Hahn, Weezer, Koretz, Krikorian, Labange, Parks, Perry, Reyes, Rosendahl, Smith, Wesson, Zine, Garcetti. 12 members present and a quorum, Mr. President.
Okay, first order of business, please.
Approval of the minutes.
All right, Mr. Krikorian moves and Mr. Zine seconds. Without objection, those will be approved. Next order of business.
Commendatory resolutions for approval.
Mr. Cardenas moves and Mr. Labange seconds. Without objection, those will be approved as well.
Mr. President, this is Tuesday, and there is the flag salute.
Okay, if I could ask everybody in council chambers to please rise for Pledge of Allegiance. And Mr. Parks, would you be kind enough to lead us?
Thank you, Mr. President. Ask everyone to rise, place their right hand over their heart and face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah, and thank you. If we can run through the agenda, please.
Items 1 through 6 are street lighting district ordinances noticed for public hearing.
Okay. We do not have any cards for those. Are those requiring votes today, then?
Yes, they do.
Okay. Anybody wishing to call those special? If not, let's go ahead and take up 1 through 6. Please prepare the roll and tabulate the vote.
12 ayes.
That is approved. Next item.
Items 7 through 14 are items for which public hearings have not been held. 10 votes are required for consideration.
Okay, we have cards on 7, 8, 9, 11, and 14. And if there's no objection to consideration, the other ones are before us. Colleagues, we have 7 through 14. 10 for Mr. Zine. Yes, for Zine and Perry.
13, hold it on the desk, please.
13. Mr. Cardenas. Number 12. No, anybody wishing to call it special? Otherwise, we just have 12, okay? Please prepare the roll on 12. I think we're going to, Mr. Parks, did you want to amend number 12 to make sure that in the report back where we have Department of Transportation as well? Remember that was the meter system piece?
Oh, yes, this is, let me just get my, yes. We wanted to amend this to ask for, as it relates to CF number 10-0139-S1.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Parks. I'm actually looking at the wrong day, so it's a different number 12. My apologies.
Which?
Okay. Why don't we hold 12 on that's Mr. Weezar's motion. We'll hold that on the desk. My apologies. I was looking a day ahead. All right, so those are all called special. We'll go to general public comment right now, and then we'll come back to those items called special. Dr. Clyde Williams is our first speaker, to be followed by Arnold Sachs.
Dr. Clyde Williams, 4115 Barrett Road, El Sereno, Northeast LA. Neighborhood councils. We don't like done very much for various reasons. However, the mayor nominated commissioners that had never attended a neighborhood council meeting. You then confirmed those nominations. So we haven't gotten much, and we don't expect to get much. You have special events, you have street furniture, funds, all available for doing pretty much the same thing as what approximately 90,000 hours of neighborhood council members do every year. That is $50 an hour per person. So what do we do with that, all of our money, the great amount of $4.5 million? We give it to the neighborhoods for exactly the same projects that you have special events and that you have street furniture funds that are allocated. We would like to have our independence preserved as required by city charter. We can be as transparent as anyone can be, and probably a lot more than city council. So what we're trying to do now is work out our elections, which come in the next couple of months. So why don't you just give all of the special events budget over to the neighborhood councils? Why don't you give the remaining, whatever it may be, clerks' funds to the neighborhood councils to hold the elections? And why don't you outsource the entire Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, because you're taking our empowerments away from us right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Arnold Sachs is our next speaker.
Yes, good morning. Arnold Sachs. I really suffered on Friday. After the meeting, I went into the council office over there to review, because I didn't like being called a liar regarding my statements with the AEG fiasco. So I went in and reviewed the meeting that was held October 23rd. And I apologized to Ms. Perry, because she didn't say she hired Fred Wucher. But she did say she was looking to get funds to hire an outside attorney. But what was really interesting was going over this in transparent and open meeting. And you look and you say there was meetings held from 2001 to 2006, including an updated meeting, signage. So which one of the meetings addressed super graphics? Which one of the meetings addressed digital signage at the AEG complex? Because that's what these 6 permits were about, the super graphics and the digital signage. Because he didn't have the permits. He had 16 signs already up, on-site signage. He had 6 more permits he needed for off-site signage. According to the Building and Safety, on-site signage is regulated by square footage. Mr. Zine even asked about amending the signage ordinance, make the 6 signs on-site. But off-site signage is regulated by a permit, because that reflects on super graphics and digital signage. So, Mr. Alarcon, you mentioned what the intent of the council was in all these meetings. What was the intent? When did the council decide to discuss super graphics and digital signage before Rocky Del Cadillo's offer that he had to make to the signage companies reflecting on the new billboard ordinance you have now? You're a bunch of liars.
Chris Flagg is our next speaker. After Mr. Flagg is Sean Murphy.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, honorable council members. Thank you for allowing me to speak in front of you. As you might recall from last week, I'm an environmental engineering associate in the Bureau of Sanitation with some education, meager education in economics. I come to you with Moody's from their last downgrading, and I have a few different comments than the ones that you have been putting in the media and that probably the mayor has been putting in the media. I'd like to emphasize that Moody's starts off by saying that there's an erosion in the city's willingness to act quickly on its mid-year budget. Now, I admire that this council is meeting 4 days a week to look at the budget, but that's a little bit late. We should have been doing this 2 years ago. I do very much appreciate and respect for you working on it so hard at this time. But you're still slow in implementing planned cost savings, plans that should have been made 2 years ago. And there are still hundreds of millions of net receivables. That's what Moody says, hundreds of millions of net receivables that we're not taking in. What's going on? Why are we bending over backwards to cut and slash in indispensable city services when there's hundreds of millions of receivables not collected? The 3-year plan calls for a structural balanced budget in the year 2012. So we know one reason for the downgrade was not because of ongoing circumstances, but because we cannot achieve a balanced budget for 3 more years. When we go into looking for solutions, let's look not just for concessions from the unions, but the constructive suggestions the unions have provided in terms of eliminating personnel services contracts of $200 million, half of sanitation and engineering's consultant work for $150 million. Total, $725 million could be saved annually. Let's look at this seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And we do have a strike force that's been set up specifically on the debt collection. We're working a couple years on it, but we're now working with the city attorney, and that piece has been moving pretty swiftly forward. So thank you very much and appreciate your comments. Sean Murphy is our next speaker. After that is Larry Milton.
Yes, good morning, City Council. How are you this morning? I went to the Chinese New Year. I went to the Chinese parade. I had a good time. Whoever represents Chinatown, I want to let them know I had a good time at the parade. It gets better every year. I have a message for the mayor. I pray for the mayor that he doesn't lay off too many people. I know we're in a budget crisis right now, and I don't want people to move out of L.A. They can only put up with this. This economy has to turn around, and I hope the mayor does. I have praise for the mayor that he doesn't lay off too many people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Larry Milton is our next speaker. After that is Donna Pearman.
All right, good morning, Council. I'd like to come here with a different approach here. I flew in from Louisiana to let you all know that we do have a technology that's available so that the city of Los Angeles can actually come to a cost savings in billions of dollars. There's no jobs need to be lost. We can also maintain the police department and fire departments. And I know I'm not going to have enough time to go through all of what we have, but I would like to meet with some of the members, which I did send emails out to let them know that we do have the technology available to do so, and we're already working it in the ports. We've already shown it, and also the 8,000 truckers that was laid off in the Port of Long Beach. I did go to the commissioners' meeting on the 21st of December to let those guys know as well that we can sustain those jobs as well as all the others. So in the infrastructures and billions of dollars, it can be saved. And if there's an opportunity that I can give you my email address, and also my phone number is area code 318-730-2857. The website that you can go to is www.mxmproducts.com. And you can reach me at any time. I'll be here for about another week in the Los Angeles area to meet with some of the council members. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. Donna Pearman and Van Nuys is our last speaker on general public comment.
Hello, Mr. Garcetti. Anyway, I'm sorry Miriam couldn't be here. All this things with city problems has gotten sick. Anyway, our city council and our mayor are discussing budget cuts, a difficult decision. It's hard to let people go, having furloughs, and we again have to raise the Grand Avenue project. $3 billion for the Grand Avenue project, which aims to become the Los Angeles city center, draws locals and tourists with retail shops, housing units, and green space. New part is a 16-acre park between City Hall and Music Center, which will be the anchor project. Is it really necessary to add a park to a business area? Our CRA is bleeding our city dry, taking our tax increment money from all the CRA projects. Let's unfreeze a property tax to be used for city services. We are in a deficit because of all the CRA and the city council spendthrift ways. Do you really need to spend $1.5 million for the waterways? I believe that that's way more than what we really need to spend. We need to say no to $100 per parcel tax that will be on the June ballot. It's time to say no to putting on the backs of the homeowners. Let's give the CRA money to the schools to save jobs. Let's use the CRA Grand Avenue money. CRA has robbed the city enough. Let's ask the CLA and the CAO to sacrifice. Let's ask the city council to continue not having raises until our city is solvent, all 15 members. Let's ask our mayor to use his own money to travel with. He would use his time wiser if it was his dollar. How much was really spent on city business? How come the city council stopped telling its public what days they were taken off? Can the President Garcetti keep track? Why do we say it's the city employees that are in debt when it's the CRA, our city council with their pet projects? We need to sacrifice. The whole city needs to receive the services and needs to keep it solved. Let's put a half-cent sales tax.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pearman. And just as a matter of public information, we do announce when council members are excused from council meetings, and that's a matter of public record. Thank you very much for your comments, everybody, this morning. We appreciate them. We'll move to the items that were called special. If we can take up first item number 7, and we have a card from the public on item 7. Dr. Clyde Williams, if you'd like to come forward.
One minute. Visibility. Your previous negotiations got us into the structural deficit, which exists now and will be existing probably for the next 20 years for the city of Los Angeles. But anyway, so why keep it a secret? Why are we not told more about what's going on and really how much it's going to contribute to the structural deficit that the CAO highlighted in his presentation from the chairs in front of me? So why not have it online? Put it online. What are the negotiating positions? What does the unions want? Because we don't get any idea as to where we start and where we're going to finish. Although the CAO said, hey, we're going to finish in deep debt for a long, long time. And kind of, aren't those pension plans part of the structural deficit, which the early retirement is considering also? Thank you.
Thank you. There's no action necessary on this, so we'll go to our next item, item number 8, and we do have a card on that as well. Arnold Sachs, if you'd like to come forward on item number 8. Mr. Sachs. All right, he's no longer in the room. And then Phyllis Doherty, if you'd like to come forward.
Good morning, Phyllis Doherty from Animal Issues Movement. I wouldn't be here, but I came down from the commission meeting because I heard it was called special. And Jake and I want, Jake Miller from LA Animal Services, who's working today out there doing the heavy lifting for everybody, want to really thank you from the bottom of our hearts for the efforts that you're making on this. And I was at the Animal Care Conference this weekend, and I know that there is negotiating going on with the county, but it still could be a cooperative effort. There's still no need for us to lose our canvassers, and there'll still be a lot of effort to put in. Licensing is so important. Just for the people out there, I just want to say that it's not a punitive effort to have people license their dogs. It's safety for the animals. They can get home. It's safety for the community, because if there is a problem, we know whose dog it is, either negatively or positively, and we can protect everyone. And mainly, it's a health issue mandated by the state of California so that we don't have another rabies outbreak. And there was a great deal of discussion about that at the Animal Care Conference, which was the animal control directors from all over the state. So everyone in the state now is taking a really good look at licensing, and it's going to be much more uniform, and we want to be right at the forefront of that with a really successful and positive way of doing it. So we thank you very, very much, and Jake said he's sorry he can't be here, but doesn't mean that he isn't just extremely grateful.
Thank you, Mr. Ardale. Mr. Garcetti.
Thank you very much, and I'll just be brief on this, colleagues. Thank you, Phyllis and Jake and everybody who's worked on this. This was a classic example of kind of left hand not necessarily talking to the right hand in government, where we have one governmental entity, our Department of Water and Power, maintaining a database about what dogs exist, because obviously meter checkers need to know for their own safety, and we know those DWP employees have often been bit by dogs, and there's probably not one that hasn't been bit by a dog. But we also have great animal licensors who canvass, a program that this council helped start, helped protect twice, and right now is proposed to be on the chopping block. Now, we all know that there's difficult decisions that we have to make. Right now, I think the department itself estimates that each one of these canvassers brings back about 80 to 90% of their salary in the licenses that they bring back. In the past years, when this was just going to be put in the general fund, we protected that money to make sure that it was put into spay and neuter vouchers for low-income residents. And that's so critical because I think, as Ms. Doherty said, this is not about, getting some sort of punishment out there so that we can have city workers. City workers exist to do good, to keep our community safe, to make sure that dogs are safe as well. And if we can cross-check our DWP database, which DWP in the past has said was not necessarily available, although I understand it was shared a few years ago, to see where that database is now, then we can have more surgical canvassing. We can go to places where we know DWP has identified a dog, but when we cross-check on the licenses, there's no license paid for at that home. And in doing so, we can help bring in more revenues for more safety. We can make sure we're not creating a deficit at all. And so I would urge your support moving forward. I want to thank the department, both departments, for working together on this. But it's one of those classic examples of where we can raise, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even over time millions of dollars more by bringing that together. So with that, I'd ask for your support. I know we've got departments that are here to speak on it, but I think it's pretty straightforward. Everybody loves saying doggy database, so I know there's been a lot of interest about this, but let's move this as one of the many things we're doing right now to help preserve our jobs, balance our budget, and provide good services. Thank you.
Mr. Alarcon.
Yeah, is the department here?
Animal Services, please come to the table.
Department of Water and Power, actually. Yeah, I was actually wondering if you have similar information on horses. Okay. Can you speak into the mic, please?
Deputy City Attorney Janet Carr-Cannon on behalf of the Department of Water and Power. Good morning. I'm Janet Carr-Cannon. I'm a Deputy City Attorney. I'm here on behalf of the Department of Water and Power.
Okay. I was under the impression that horse owners get a discount for water because of the consumption of water by horses.
That is a question I don't know the answer to.
Can I get somebody from DWP who can answer that question, please?
I'm not sure that there's anybody
here. Can we table
today.
this item until I get an answer to that question?
Mr. Alcon,
I want to support, obviously I would support this, but I think if we can get the data on horses, we can get them registered too, because that not only affects our ability to get the fees for registering their animals, it also affects our development process where we don't know where the horses are because they're not registered, and we're creating development in areas that should not be developed as such, and it's affecting our community plans. So if DWP has the information on horses, I think we should also transfer that over to animal regs.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, and I wrote that exemption, and when we wrote the exemption, we said if they have a registered horse at the address, they can apply for
So it's
the
only for
DWP.
registered horses?
Only if they have a registration at that address can they get the DWP discount. So if for that, and we know 50% of people with horses don't have registration.
But if they have,
So they don't get the discount.
But if they have one registered horse, they might have 10 unregistered horses, and they'll still get the discount. So if we could get that list, I would make a friendly amendment to add horses to the list.
Do we want to table this for the moment until we can get someone from Water and Power to answer those questions? or
Well,
we want
actually,
to-
that was enough information. I don't need any
Yeah,
more.
let's add that to it.
So I'd like to make a friendly amendment to add horses to
I'm
the...
tempted to vote nay with the horses, but I'll go ahead and do it.
But you'll vote yay. A rogue scholar came up with that. Thank you. Mr. Labange.
Mr. City Attorney, Madam City Attorney, is there any area of technicality that we're going into? Because there is some privacy and it relates to, like, what taxes you pay in Los Angeles as a business or what fees you have. Are we crossing on the area that civil liberties would think we would be violating? I want to know. I'm not talking about the ACLU, but I'm just talking about general.
Yes,
Is
sir.
there?
We have considered the
Here's the city attorney.
we have considered the privacy issues involved, and what we would propose is that we
Hold on a second. There's a lot of noise in the chambers, so please quiet down so we can all hear the conversation. And we have a representative from Animal Services also that's here, since this does affect animal services. And that question may be for Animal Services. So we have the two representatives here now, Water and Power and Animal Services. There you go. Mr. Labange. No, we're going to keep your clock going, Mr. Labange. Don't worry about your time.
Say it again?
Don't worry about your time. We'll keep you going.
Okay, the question is, are we violating or potentially violating, we're going to your agency up on Hope Street to say, tell us where all the dogs are, and then we're giving it to another agency to go out and try to collect funds from that. Are we violating anything there? And have you looked at that aspect of it?
Yes, we have taken a look at that aspect, and what we would propose is what we have done historically, which is we would provide the addresses of the households that have dogs, but not the names of the individuals who reside at that address. So we would limit the information to just that information that would be necessary for the public health and safety purpose.
Okay, so with that being said, for Animal Services, have you tested this at all, and is it a value to you?
Linda Barth with LA Animal Services. I'm sure that it will have value to us. We don't know how much information DWP's database may contain, but if we get a list of addresses where there's information about dogs, what we'll do is we'll cross-check that database against our existing licensing database, and then we'll use that information to contact.
Before you door knock.
That's correct. First, we'll send a letter.
Okay, have you ever parked outside a dog park and said, hello, Tom, is Dexter registered?
I don't personally know that we have done that, but we could send canvassers.
Have they done that to you? Okay, all I'm just saying, members, instead of we go into this, and I'm for you, Mr. Garcetti, but I would say this, I would rather have us go to our dog areas, whether it's around Silver Lake Reservoir in my district or into Mr. Garcetti's district, to go to Runyon Canyon and say, hello. Anybody have a dog out there? Anybody have a dog here? Give me a dog's name. Hey, Lulu, does your buddy there who has you on that leash, does he pay a license? Okay. I am just...
That's what Lulu would say.
All right, but he still didn't answer the question.
Yes.
Lulu. Okay. Here's the question I want to say. We're engaging in something that may make a little sense. I think we can enhance it by having animal services officer in a positive way do there. And then when Mr. Alico brought up the horses, there's a number of horses that come from Glendale and Burbank across the bridges into Griffith Park. I welcome those horses. I love horses. And nothing better than seeing horses on the trails in Griffith Park. But at the same time, should the people of Glendale and Burbank that house those horses pay a Los Angeles equine tax to pay for improvements, which 100% go to horses? I believe yes, but I think we should do it in a friendly way. I think we're stepping on areas that we could be troubled in the future. So I look for more discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Labange. Mr. Rosendahl.
Thank you, Mr. President. Indeed, I have a dog named Lulu. She's about 8 years old now, a beautiful German Shepherd. We used to have Rosie as well. Here's my big question, folks. How many dogs are now registered, percentage-wise, do you think, in the city?
Approximately one-third of the dogs, about
1/3 of the
120,000.
dogs. And how many is that?
About 120,000.
And what kind of revenue do you get from that 120,000?
Gross revenue is between 2 million, 2.3 million, and then a certain percentage of that, though, about 600,000 or 700,000 goes to the spay-neuter fund to help subsidize spay-neuter
so
programs.
a good 2 million, right?
Approximately.
So that's 1/3. So if we had the ideal world, you would bring in another 4 million.
That's correct.
Which would help you in animal services in this terrible budget.
And with spay-neuter, yes.
Okay. And so now we know that DWP, I know they have a record of my dogs because they send me a little note every now and say, we're going to come and do this, or we're going to do that. Please keep your dog in. So I know they have that. And I didn't give it to them. But Lulu must have barked at them at the right time. Okay, so how do you see this cross-fertilization happening? What can you do to make this happen so we get all of the dogs registered?
What we would expect, not knowing how DWP exactly would give it to us, but if we can have some sort of a database with addresses where there's been a dog activity, one or more, then if it's in something we can sort with SQL, we'll compare that to our existing licensing database, look at where there's expired licenses or current licenses, and then we'll call out those addresses where it looks like they're showing a dog and we don't have a license. We'll absolutely send them a letter saying we understand you have a dog. We already have a protocol for doing that. And we'll also probably do some things like sort by area or zip code to see if that's a fertile area in particular to send our existing canvassing crew. Because we see, wow, there's a large number of unlicensed dogs that DWP has seen. And so then we can attack some of those neighborhoods by area using the address list.
So that we can put these people in the doghouse, so to speak.
We can make them compliant, which I'm sure they want to be with the requirements of the law.
Okay, last question has to do with cats. People have said to me, why don't we register cats? What's the answer to that?
Registering cats has shown in some jurisdictions to be a successful way of reducing the cat population, making owners more responsible, helping us with spay-neuter outreach, and so on. The City of Los Angeles, my experience is that there's some concern about registering cats and that cats are free roaming, so I think that's something we would have to explore further.
Could you explore further about cats?
Absolutely.
Just take a look at that.
Absolutely.
And I say to anybody watching this, if your dog isn't registered, you're going in the doghouse if you don't go forward with it. We need the $4 million. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendahl. Mr. Cardenas.
I'll take it one step further, Mr. Rosendahl. We don't need the $4 million bucks. Us human beings need that money to help the animals. If we put $4 million more into the department, we would reduce the amount of euthanasia. We would get closer to a no-kill city. We'd be able to staff them at an amount that they would actually be able to have the personnel to do all that wonderful work of caring for the animals, educating the public, etc. Now, I think what this motion has to do with is trying to appropriately utilize the eyes and ears in a legal way of staff that are within the city family, for example at DWP, to help an understaffed department do their job, correct? For example, if somebody, well, many, hundreds of bodies with DWP are actually going to every single address in the city, because that's what DWP does. I don't know of one, and I'd love to get the emails of those addresses within the city limits that do not have a DWP water or power hookup. If there is one out there, I'd love to get the emails, because I think that it's almost 99.99% of all the residences and businesses in the city of Los Angeles actually has a man or a woman with a DWP patch on their shirt or their jacket that actually goes at least every other month and walks onto or in front of that property and actually sees with their eyes and hears with their ears what's going on. And if they see a dog or what have you, it's my understanding that DWP actually notes whether or not a property has a dog, correct?
Correct.
Now, DWP notes that that property has a dog because they're just nosy. What is the reason why DWP actually notates the fact that a property 13452 Fillmore Street in Pacoima has a dog? Why did they do that?
It's a public safety issue for the meter reader themselves to make sure that they're not attacked by a dog or surprised by it. And I think that that's an important issue because having those dogs licensed to make sure that they've had their rabies shots, but it's important to the meter readers themselves.
Exactly. Now, DWP garners information potentially for every address within the city. Now, if the department that actually handles the rabies shots and the licensing and things of that nature, by the way, does that department have the personnel to visit every single property in the city at least once a year?
No, we don't, sir.
You don't even have the personnel to visit each property once a year. And here we have a department within the city that visits every single property in the city at least once every other month. Why wouldn't we share that information? Especially when, coincidentally, the department that handles water and power is notating something about whether or not they have a dog on the premises. Or, also, I'm curious about this, does the department note whether or not they have 2 or 3 or 5 dogs? Or they just note that it's dog or not?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Who knows the answer to that question?
You have to understand I'm with the city attorney's office. It would be my client.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Said I'm with the city attorney's office. It would be my client, somebody at the Department of Water and Power.
Okay, somebody at the Department of Water and Power. This debate on this issue has been going on for about 15, maybe even 20 minutes. Is there anybody who's rushed over from the Department of Water and Power who can answer that question yet? Please come forward. My last question was, do they notate whether or not there's a dog at that address, or do they notate whether or not there's 2 dogs or 3 dogs? How involved is that notation when they notice on the record that there's a dog at that address?
Councilmember Wendy Yancey, Water and Power. We were prepared to come back with a full report on March 2nd or 3rd, as the motion stated. But to answer your question, it is my understanding that it just notes dog or dogs on premises.
What I'd like the department to do, if the maker of the motion wouldn't mind, is that that report actually explain whether or not that is the case, if they note that dog or not, and also if the department could let this council know whether or not there's anything that precludes them from noting how many dogs they've noticed at that property. Okay, in that detail at least. Again, I believe that this motion makes way too much sense. We're wasting resources of the taxpayer dollars. We're wasting resources of information that is already at our fingertips. And unless there's some law, Mr. Labange, that precludes us from sharing that information from the Department of Water and Power to Animal Services, I think we need to do this. It only makes sense. It saves money, and in the long run, it is going to save the lives of animals in the tens of thousands of per year. Thank you.
Mr. Reyes.
I just want to thank you for your cooperation in this effort. I know we're breaking our silos and creating new strategies. It's about time we do that in the city. My concern is when you have the employee go to homes, let's say there's 2 or 3 dogs and there's 3 units in one structure, and let's say the father was laid off, people are hanging on, they can't afford a license, they're getting by. What happens in those cases? And I don't expect an answer right now. When you report back, if we can look at the issue of poverty, there's going to be a large slice of our population, unfortunately, that are going through foreclosures. People are hanging on, they've been laid off, and they have pets. And maybe they haven't paid for their license. Maybe they don't have a license. What do we do then? Does it get notated? Do we just say 1 dog, 3 dogs, 4 dogs? I mean, just to understand that that layer of our communities exists, and people are going through hardships in these declining times. So I just want to make sure that in our policy development, we address those challenges.
Councilmember, I can let you know that we do face that issue with families, And there are a couple things that we do. One is that an unaltered license is only $15, so it is not a very expensive item. But there are families sometimes that don't have their pets spayed or neutered yet, and we do offer them. In fact, our canvassers are very good at this, promoting our free coupons for those who are in certain economic category to help them get their animals spayed or neutered, and then they have the less expensive license. We also conduct very low-cost vaccination clinics at all of our shelters, some of them multiple times a month, and we can also point them in those directions. So we do have some very low-cost options that we help pet owners who are maybe having financial difficulty or live in economically disadvantaged areas to try to absolutely reduce to the lowest level the cost of their license and care of their pet, good care of their pet. It's good to get the pet vaccinated and checked at the vet for free spay-neuter surgery. So these are all good things for the pets and help very much lower the financial impact on a responsible pet owner. So we do have those programs.
I appreciate that statement. There are many families that are going to be thinking, well, what do I do now? Do I hide the dog? What other things I need to do? And it's just the opposite. Let us find a way to help you
yes,
get
absolutely.
through this.
Yes.
And what you just stated will hopefully build up that confidence and those families, allow us to help them
yes.
deal with that particular challenge.
That's what we'd like to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. LaBonge?
Yeah, Ms. Barth, it's $15 for a dog license, right? How much if you're not neutered?
It's $100 plus...
Your man back there told me it's $200, $225, so let's get it straight.
If the reason is the spay-neuter law in the city of Los Angeles, in order to keep your animal unaltered, you must meet certain exemptions. Exemptions include like medical problems or the animal's being trained for show or
Well, what's the basic person, not,
then that person, the only exemption they might need is to purchase a breeder's permit, and that costs $120. That's why for some
but how many people you think are in that category out of all the dogs you think that are there?
Currently, there's about in the last year, for example, there's about 5,000 animals that still got an unaltered permit, and most of those have paid for breeding.
When we go out and we take something from Water and Power, and the reason why Water and Power knows it, that somebody walks every street to check the meter. That's why they know it, and it's a safety issue. So you don't get, you don't spook the animal, or the animal doesn't attack you, or whatever the case may be, if that is the case. That being said, what's going to happen to the citizen who is not breeding dogs, who's just a dog lover, has a dog, but it's not neutered? To get a license, what it's going to cost them?
If that person doesn't meet other exemptions, the way the law...
Forget the other exemptions, just
then
talk
he has
about
to pay $220 for every animal.
$220.
Or he has 60 days to get that animal spayed or neutered, and we'll provide whatever assistance we can.
Right.
And
I
then
would
he only
just
pays
say,
15.
members, how many dog parks do we have in the city? You used to work at Record Parks, you know?
I think it's 7.
7 dog parks?
Maybe 8.
Have you ever gone to a dog park and said hi?
Our canvassers and officers have gone to dog parks.
Like this year, right under this time?
I couldn't tell you
Okay, so
exactly
I'm
how
just
many,
saying, members,
but they do.
and Mr. Garcetti, I'm looking for this here. I would rather just say, from a humanitarian effort, to go to raise awareness, because I remember once when I was 24, I met a guy, he said he's going to a town in the world, and he said it's a fine city. And what he meant it was a fine city is anything you do, they get a fine. And if we want to turn our city into a fine city that is somewhat a little bit aggressive, like we are with parking tickets to 8 o'clock at night and longer, it could sometimes make people upset to the point where they don't like how the city's running. I know we're in trouble, but we're not going for gold in the gutter here. We're just scraping at a situation here. So I'd like to caution us so we're sensitive to the people that we represent. Certainly with a public campaign that everybody should be licensed, everybody should be involved is a very good thing, and then maybe come in with a more of an aggressive standpoint. But all of a sudden turn the page, we're going to upset a lot of people.
Mr. Alarcon.
Yeah, I really thought we were going to be through this discussion very quickly, but I have to dispute what you're saying, Mr. LaBonge. We're not fining anybody. We are registering the animals. Right now, 1/3 of the animal owners, the dog owners, are responsible for all the payment to animal regs. And that's unfair to them. and they're doing the right thing, and they're being charged a registration fee, but it's the others who are the burden, and we need to get them to register their animals. And so, no, it's not. We're not fining anybody. We are merely getting them to register their animals so that we can create a better environment for the animals, which is our primary purpose here. Yes. And secondly, to support our efforts to maintain a system so that we don't have dogs and other animals running around wild. But this is an issue of individual responsibility. People need to register their animals. It happens across the nation. It's like, in fact, we get more participation in this than we do in voting, and that's a good thing. But but it's perfectly acceptable for us to charge people to register their animals so that we can maintain a system to keep our community safe and healthy, and most importantly, to teach our community how to better manage their animals.
Thank you. Mr. Garcetti.
I urge your support as amended. It's not a fine. Mr. Alico made the point I was going to make.
That amendment with the horse?
Add the horses, and let's do it.
Mr. Labange, you pushed your button again, sir.
Will it include horses that don't live in our city, that are in our city?
Happy to look at. I don't think DWP has that, so it might not be. Hold on. Just to finish my thought, the city attorney may say we should introduce a motion on that, because that's not necessarily what this one was about. The horse thing has some. We're cross-checking where animals.
Department, I need to introduce a motion.
Sorry. Then tell them on the side for sure. I've supported with that.
Suggestion is when we make changes, we sometimes go out and we knock on doors and we tell people we're changing parking restrictions. We tell people we're doing things. All I'm saying, there's a variety of locations. I don't want to have people go to their home or do that stuff. Are we doing this by letter to them, Linda?
That's how we'd start, yes.
So what's the cost of mailing compared to that? I mean, I would just say, if we went to our dog parks, our parks, and got a little test, did a little instant poll, and see if there's a large number, you could still do that. I just think it's a little bit of a bureaucratic step that may not be a greatest result as we want. And I know people love their dogs.
That matter is now up for a vote with the amendment. Colleagues, open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
13 ayes.
Very well. Thank you very much. Mr. Reyes for a presentation, for an introduction. Introduction, Mr. Reyes.
Introduction. Thank you, Council President. Colleagues, we are honored here to have guests from the state of Yucatan and Mexico. These mayors, some joined by their wives, represent cities such as Teya, Teco, Quintana Roo, Tecanto, Mani, Baca, Tapacan, Panaba, Kusama, and Muxupip, and Tixcoco. The wives of these mayors each head a department in the respective cities that look into the well-being of children. Joining the mayors today are also members of Ende Maya, an organization representing the governor of Yucatan, la gobernadora Ivonne Ortega Pacheco. Bienvenidos. Estamos aquí los alcaldes, aquí en el edificio municipal de los legisladores de Los Ángeles. So, bienvenidos y ojalá pueden pasar un buen tiempo aquí en Los Ángeles. Y un poco ahorita vamos a tomar unas fotos. Ende Maya is based in Yucatan and committed to preserving the Mayan culture and mobilizing the Mayan people. They represent all Yucatan immigrants in the United States and within the state as well. They are the voice for this underrepresented community. I just want to welcome them to the City Hall chambers. Bienvenidos. One round of applause, please.
Bienvenidos. Gracias por venir. Thank you very much, Mr. Reyes. If we can take up item 14 next, please. And if we can ask Personnel Department to come forward and report on our vacancies and transfers update and the coalition concession items. Colleagues, this is our weekly update on our vacancies and transfers. Your chance to follow those along and to make sure we are pushing hard to realize those savings as quickly as possible. And personnel has been asked, I can direct your attention towards them. Hello.
Hello. Good morning. Since we last met, we've continued to work with departments and employees to encourage transfer. I'm sorry, I was running.
All right, don't worry. Catch your breath.
Thank you.
Catch your breath.
It's important to note that we did not limit the transfers only to the people who were being laid off. Our goal, we had two goals, and that was to give as many placement opportunities to people who were targeted, as well as to make sure that we were relieving the general fund. To date, we have had 2,145 employees file for a transfer, which is an increase from last week. The number of positions available has increased to 406. 190 job offers have been accepted or have been made and accepted, with 27 job offers pending. And they're pending primarily because they're safety-sensitive positions and they need to have additional information regarding their backgrounds. 85 of those positions, while vacant, do not have a match in other departments. We are looking at those classes to see if we have people in other classifications that are targeted for layoff, to see if the requirements could be adjusted for purposes of placement. We will continue to place individuals into these positions whenever possible. In addition, we are working on special funded positions that will be available through ERIP, verifying whether or not they can be backfilled and identifying employees of potential transfer opportunities. It is our intention to have qualified people lined up well in advance so that as soon as the positions become vacant, we will have a replacement that can move from the general fund into the position. At this point, there are 43 special funded classes that are a match with general fund classes that are being targeted for layoff.
Okay. Questions, folks? Any questions on that update? All right. Yes, sorry, Ms. Hahn, go ahead.
Do you feel like these transfers are happening as fast as possible?
Yes, I do. I think that the departments have been very, very cooperative, and actually I think it's unprecedented that we have been able to transfer as many people as we have in such a short period of time.
So you're fully staffed, you're okay. I know item 10 is a motion that is saying that the layoffs should be processed last in your office so that you can keep processing these transfers and these early retirements. So I just want to make sure that your department is fully staffed up and you're okay.
I may be coming back to you. I think one of the things that we're looking at is we need to be very cautious about our making sure that we have qualified people within the personnel department who are able to process both the transfers and the layoffs. We are looking at our own funds, looking at the possibility of transferring money into our overtime account, because clearly to do this kind of work requires an incredible amount of training. And so it's not that I could just go out and hire people. So the people that I have, I've got a very good group of people. We've been working with them for a couple of years now, trying to anticipate what we knew was ahead.
Right.
And so if I come back to the council for resources, it would probably be for overtime.
Okay. Let me ask, apparently last week there was another number thrown out there, 4,000, that was approved to be laid off. How long is that process going to take?
You know, the most important part of layoff is finding out the positions, the departments, and the numbers. We have the 1,000, but we do not have the additional information. So much of it depends upon what the job classification is.
I think that's what concerns me, obviously, colleagues, is that we've been told by the CAO, certainly, that we're trying to get folks off of our general fund as quickly as possible, and when it is perceived that we're not moving fast enough, then they come back and say, oh, because you didn't act quick enough, now you're going to have another 1,000 laid off. So I think for me, just give me a number. How quickly could we process 4,000 people?
What do you think? I think that at a minimum, it would be a 6-month process.
6
at
months.
A minimum.
And I think that would be a question I would ask the CAO. Is this just kind of a downward slide? Miguel, maybe you come up and tell us. If we don't move fast enough, are you going to come back, in 4 months and say, we didn't act quick enough, now we're doing another 2,000? I mean, what's happening? I mean, that's my fear. It just seems like we're not acting quick enough, and because we're not acting quick enough, our number keeps changing. Is that an accurate observation, or are we... How's this working?
Are you referring to the elimination of positions?
Yes.
Well, in the 4,000 positions will generate between $260 and $300 million next fiscal year. Our deficit for next fiscal year is 585.
So
485 rather.
6 months is okay with you that it will take to process that many eliminations of positions, I guess is my question.
No, it's not.
Okay,
But
how do we move, how do you solve this problem?
the process problem?
Yes.
I think that the one thing that we have to really be concerned with is how complex the layoff will be. Once we get a better sense of what we're dealing with.
I think you're right. And in that complexity, no one's really been giving us the true number on what it cost us to eliminate positions or process layoffs, however you want to say it. I mean, do we have to pay vacation time? Do we have to pay, insurance benefits? What does each of those people cost us to lay off?
In the dollar figure that I gave you, between $260 and $300 million, it assumes that we're having to pay insurance and unemployment and a variety of things because after a year's time...
Can you give me a ballpark of what one person would cost us to lay them off?
Do you know exactly?
I believe that the unemployment insurance would be about $12,000 on whatever the vacation payout is. It depends upon how much vacation you
What would be an
actually
average?
have.
What would be an average person's vacation pay that you might think we would? I mean, I think we need to know this, colleagues. I mean, I think we need to know what it costs for every person we lay off, because we think it's going to be all this great savings, but there is a cost to it. And it's complicated, and it's not moving quickly, so it's not the perfect solution.
Well, I think that one of the things that I would like to ask is, I think we're dealing first with the 1,000. And when we get to that point, we will be in a much better position to be able to give estimates as to what the length of time it would take to reduce the workforce by another 3,000. But there are many variables connected with this, and frankly, until I know what the positions are, I can't really give you an honest estimate.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I think what we're finding is this is not an easy solution. I mean, and it keeps getting worse because it's taking long to do, it's complicated, it does cost us money. So I think there's many of us that want to try every other possible way, to save money than these layoffs.
Well, there is another alternative.
Pay cut.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's, something we certainly want to look at. Let me ask a question. I'm way over time and no one's paying attention, which is just an unusual thing, so I'm just going to take it. Have we brought everyone to the table like we did previously with our coalition of the workforce? Have they been at the proverbial table to talk about some of these solutions, whether it's pay cuts, furloughs, layoffs? Has that table taken place?
I met with the coalition several times And they made it very clear that they're not going to give much more than what they've already given. I'm meeting again with them on Thursday, and I'm interested in hearing.
Yeah, because that doesn't sound like them to me, frankly. That doesn't sound like how they worked with us last time. They said, tell us what you need. We're going to go back to our workforce. We're going to see. We want to be a part of the solution, not just the problem. So that really doesn't sound like the spirit that they had last time.
No, I mean, I think their argument, and I think it's a fair one, is that they've contributed significant already.
They have.
They essentially, the concessions we receive from our partners in labor have saved this year.
Right.
And we were able to significantly reduce those deficits what we started with. But they also made it clear that they've given as much as they could give.
All right. Well, yeah. Well, and I think we're all going to keep giving, but to me, there's a better solution than throwing people out at this point in the economy. The other thing.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn. You are now 5 minutes and 25 over.
Man.
Everybody was bringing to my attention. I was distracted. But anyway, thank you. You can come back to you later. Mr. Koretz, followed by Mr. Parks and Mr. Rosendahl. Mr. Koretz, we'd be happy to hear from you again.
Well, I have a few points and questions. One is, I wonder if the CAO could tell us whether we might be moving more quickly than we're legally allowed to, because I'm hearing from folks that all of our child care people have been told all of their jobs are going to be eliminated. Many recreation parks and parks people have been told all their jobs are going to be eliminated. And it sounds like it has to go beyond the 1,000 that were authorized with positions. So are we telling a bunch of people that they're going to be laid off before the council has approved a list of those positions and we actually have a plan? And is that coming from the mayor's direction? And if so, does the mayor have the authority to lay off without the council approving it?
Well, the action that took place last week affirmed the 1,000 positions and added to those positions an additional 3,000. We are currently working with the mayor's office and personnel to identify, of the original 1,000, how many of those positions have been transferred to different proprietaries or special funds, so that we know what the remaining number is. And then the process will begin immediately once we know what that is. I'm not familiar if there needing to be another step to come to council for the original 1,000, given last week's action.
I don't think we're talking about that, because my sense is that the numbers of employees that are being told that they're going to be laid off go beyond whatever the 1,000 remaining could possibly be. And so my sense is general managers have been told by the mayor to start warning a broader group of people, and I'm wondering whether that's within his legal purview.
Well, I have not seen a list, and I don't know, Maggie, you have, of any positions that go beyond the 1,000.
No.
And so if a general manager is sharing with his or her personnel that more layoffs are likely, I could understand that. I've done that with my own staff. I had an all-staff meeting so that they understood what took place last week, and I shared with them that we had identified 5 positions in our office for layoff, 4 of which transferred to a different to a proprietary, and to clarify what happened, I met with them and I let them know that the council has now approved an additional 3,000. We don't know what those positions are yet. As any general manager, we will be working to identify them, but I haven't done that yet in my own office, but we'll be doing so quickly.
So have we decided to close down every single child care program that's in a park?
I can't speak on behalf of the Parks Department. I don't know if there's somebody here. In the Parks Department, there were some positions in the original 1,000 that included child care functions.
Did it include all of them? Because I think if we have gotten the word out that we are eliminating all of them, it strikes me that we're getting legally ahead of anything that the council has authorized.
They're part of the original 1,000, and your council has authorized movement on the original 1,000.
So they've authorized eliminating all of the child care programs in the original 1,000, eliminating every single position.
For the positions related to child care in the original 1,000, yes.
That's not what I'm asking. Have we eliminated every single child care position in a park in the city and authorized that already?
I don't know the answer to that. We would need to have the Director of Parks answer that question.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Parks, followed by Mr. Rosendahl.
Thank you, Mr. President. Miguel, let me just ask, this came up at the budget meeting yesterday and a lot of conversation about the rec and parks. Could you explain what the source of those funds are and what's generating some of those cutbacks?
Well, the source of the Parks Department is funded by two categories. Maybe I could have Patty join me to clarify more specifically. There's a portion that they're guaranteed as part of the charter of the general fund, but in addition to that, the larger general fund contributes to the overall Parks Department, in particular to pay for the related costs.
Yeah, what I'm concerned with is the specific funding for the child care that's on Rec and Park property.
Do you know the answer to that?
Are you talking about the state money?
Yes. Do we get state money for that in that regard?
We get state money, and the Rec and Park proposal would have kept the two child care centers that are state funded open with the certified staff. It is only the other child care centers where they're funding it through their own charter appropriation that they were proposing to move away from licensed child care to unlicensed after-school care of a different sort, where they would have after-school activities, but it wouldn't be under the state licensing guidelines.
They would be using the same city facilities.
Correct.
But the issue is because of the cutback in the funds, they're not able to maintain it at the level that they are today.
Correct.
Okay, and you said that with the state funding...
The two facilities that receive state grant funds would remain because the grant is funding those facilities.
Okay.
That is my understanding.
Okay. Let me ask Maggie, on one issue you were asked earlier about the timeline, if we're able to get you that list within 20 days, then you'd have, which was a motion earlier this week, would you have the ability then to give us a more firm date of the number of people and how quickly it could be done?
I think so, and plus any resources that I would need, yes.
And then, Miguel, another thing I was going to ask you is that we've heard conversation, and it happened last night also, that people think this is a moving target. You've heard 1,000 and then 1,500 and whatever. One of the things you may relate so that the public is aware what the delay in time does to adding to the number. That as we move forward, that number increases as we have not laid people off. And so that people have an understanding it is a moving target, but it's driven by the delay in action.
That's correct. As you know, the longer it takes, and that's why I think the point that Councilwoman Hahn is an important one as it relates to the process. The bigger our hole is, and the more we have to actually cut to meet that hole. And so the laying off process is unfortunately a very cumbersome process. It's something that we've never tested before in the city, so we'll be able to identify how long it takes, how complex it is, and what resources are required to achieve it with the original 1,000 that your council has approved, and that's going to move forward soon. Once we know that, then we'll be able to have a better sense for the additional 3,000 that's been directed by your council.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rosendahl, followed by Mr. Garcetti.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning.
Good morning.
Is somebody here from Rec and Park? John Muckery, is he in the room? No. Well, can we get John Muckery in the room? We'd like to see that happen. Last night we had a budget meeting in the field. It was held in the 5th District at Hamilton High. There were about 120 citizens there. A good third were from my district. and they brought up the Mar Vista Park and the child daycare program. There is another park called Stoner Park, where the director there's an amazing job at gang intervention and prevention. We put lighting up, we put programs together, and that particular Sawtell gang is no longer using the park. They're very fearful of losing the kinds of street support that they do, that is where the rubber hits the road for my constituents. I had a couple of couples get up, parents with their children, who go to work while the kid is in the program, that they could no longer go to work if the kid is in the program. I just want to know what strategy Rec and Park is using to determine which employees are on the hit list. It just seems to me it's those that are directly relating to service. At least this is anecdotal of last night. You were there, Miguel. Right. Then there was also the librarian, this gentleman from the Pacific Palisades Library. That's an incredible library there, worrying about what that means to librarians. And we know that a person goes to a library not only to read, but to get on the computer, to look for jobs, and lots of interaction. So with the libraries, for instance, do we have a policy which days they're open and closed? Can we look at the trend of people coming in? Instead of meat-axing people across the board, be sensitive to each location, be it a Rec and Park, be it a library, or be it anything that directly affects the services. Are we getting any sense, Maggie, that they're doing that, or are they just doing, the last one hired is the first one fired kind of thing?
Well, Councilmember, I worked in the Department of Recreation and Parks for 25 years, and I don't think that there is a job in that department that doesn't touch people in one way or another. It just is one of those services that I think is very, very important to the public. And I can't speak for Mr. Muckery, but I can't imagine that any of these decisions were easy decisions to make. And I think that goes for the library as well.
And, you spoke about last night, I was moved by much of the testimony from our own employees who've dedicated their entire careers to public service. The unfortunate part of what we're facing is that it is impossible to survive the next 18 months without a significant reduction in services, particularly in the areas of parks and library. And the reason is that they're so reliant on the general fund. If you recall the pie chart that I shared in terms of what area we actually have to cut, and there's very little room that we have to be able to find the kind of reductions we need to find to get through next year. As I indicated, even the 4,000 elimination of positions will still not get us through what we need to get through for next year. And it's hard to imagine eliminating more positions beyond that. And so we're working to try to find other alternatives to the gap that exists, about $185 million. But once we identify the 4,000 positions and move forward on those, there will be a reduction in park services. There will be a reduction in library hours. And in many cases, I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Muckery reports that he has to make some of our parks passive, where they're essentially green spaces, without the kind of recreational services that we've enjoyed for many years and provided to our community. That's the reality that we're facing today, and I can't speak on the particulars of what was shared with us last night because I'm not familiar with those particular circumstances. But as I sort of see ahead in terms of what's before us, the future only gets that much more difficult.
I understand that, but intervention prevention strategies, which is one step before police action.
Right.
Police action is very expensive. Okay, intervention prevention, which is what parks do, what libraries do, becomes a critical part of our safety component, doesn't it?
There's no doubt that it's cheaper to provide a service with a recreational leader than to have to encounter a gang member who's, committing crime and is, part of now a system that's very difficult to get out of. Prevention is always a much smarter thing to do. But when over 70% of our general fund budget is in public safety, and in fire and police, which there's been clear indication by your council that is a priority in terms of a core service that we provide, then those are the trade-offs that we're making in terms of the smaller percentage that we have left to make cuts in.
Ms. Rosendahl?
Just one more question for him. I would like to do public-private partnerships on this particular issue in my district. What I'd like to know is which parks and which libraries in my district are going to lose workers. And I want to go to the private sector and see if I can get some foundations to step to the plate as a good use of their money in a situation like that. So if you can get me that data, I'll go back to foundations and groups and say, now it's time to partner with the city on basic services of intervention and prevention.
Thank you.
Okay. And if I could just comment, I agree. And if you talk to the librarian, he's actually is working on a plan to do just that for our library system as a whole. When he was in New York, the city of New York provided a base level of funding for the library system, but it was also complemented by a foundation that allowed to have a very generous system. And so it was a good demonstration of public-private partnership. And given the reality that we're facing, not just in the immediate term, but for the next several years, I think his planning and sort of projection as to where he wants to see the department is a good way to go. And I know that Mr. Muckery, who I've spoken to last night as well, is also interested in that as a model.
Very well. Mr. Garcetti.
Okay. I'll punch my...
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would just, as a procedural matter, ask that we also take up simultaneously number 10, which is the expediting of the processing of our ERIP goals, since personnel and LACERs are going to be important for that. But, colleagues, a couple of things that I wanted to point out. I think, Mr. Rosendahl, you're right on in a number of ways, but I would encourage folks, as we're getting an update here, we got numbers today on where we are: 406 positions, 195 processed, 27 pending, 43 special funded. As we bore in on those numbers, and actually that is money that, because of our actions each day, when we get this weekly report, we can begin to put and continue to put away into our bank, both for balancing our budget and meeting the shortfall of this year, strengthening our reserve fund. That was an important part. It's the reason we do this once a week. But the second piece is, as we look at moving forward in a number of different areas, I think this is the time when you have to actively get engaged. So the City Council's special gift is that I think we're the closest to constituents like yours, Mr. Rosendahl, that you were talking about, who come and directly talk to us. So what's critical for us to do in each of those areas, if you care about certain programs, if you care about certain things, is to get actively involved. For instance, the sort of park that you will have in a given area. Well, we had this problem earlier this year when we were looking at an empty lot. People wanted perhaps a park there, and we said, under these budgetary circumstances, there's no way Recon Parks is going to be able to staff that. So we turned it into a community garden. Community garden is just as active. In some ways, it's more active than a regular park. A lot of activity, a lot of people involved, over 100 families on Fountain near Western. And that was a decision we made that was both budgetary but also something that made sense for the community. Organizations like the Neighborhood Land Trust are those folks who are bringing nonprofit money in to help us maintain parks, keep programming there, to bring in other ways where the city can't step up. The same thing with child care. I mean, as we look at child care, it is a great headline, and it is something that I know everyone around this horseshoe would say, how can we cut out all the child care programs, save the two that are state funded? A few years ago, we didn't do that at all, folks. Mr. Reyes worked very hard as a chief of staff, and now as council member, to open up in his district in Echo Park a child care center. In Glassell Park, we opened up one. That's been great that the city has been able to offer free child care, but if you look at the number of children that need child care in Los Angeles, we took a lucky 1% or 2% of people who need child care and said, you've just won the lottery. Well, in bad times, maybe that's not the best approach. What we need to do is we say, we've built these facilities, let's figure out who are those community partners who can run them even better. And don't get me wrong, I've actually participated in those child care programs. I've seen them directly. I know children that are in them, and I know the workers. They're extraordinary workers. But, again, the city has to be honing in on what can and can't do. But my only message here, folks, is get involved. You can't do 100% of the work, but you're closer to what the impact is. And don't just throw it back. We can't just say, let us know what we're going to do and what the impact is. We all passed a motion I think it was a week and a half ago, that I put forward, maybe it was with Mr. Huizar, to make sure we know the service impact, and the personnel impact on all these policy decisions we're going to make. Because we're going to need to make them, but we can't delay it by saying, well, I don't understand how many people are losing their jobs and what the service impact is going to be. That's what's going to come back from all the committees and all the reports that are coming back to let us know. That doesn't mean we don't have to make the cuts. That just means now we will identify and be able to understand that. And where we can, be nimble, make those quick moves, save things in the neighborhood by raising money privately, finding business partnerships, finding the right nonprofits, but also move forward the cuts because we need to continue that pace which we've done. One last bit of news. The last 3 of the rating companies downgraded us today. Standard & Poor's gave us a downgrading. That's something that we expected. It is the last of the piece which keeps up this drumbeat, which is why it is so important for us to make sure that makes our borrowing a little bit more expensive, our MICLA funds, et cetera. Those are things that are going to be very critical for us to know. So every single day as we're looking at this, we're putting money in the bank, but we're also seeing that drumbeat and hearing that drumbeat, and that's why it's so important for us to keep this up. It doesn't mean we have to lose everything that we do, but let's be sober about what we can keep.
Thank you, Mr. Garcetti. Mr. Labonge.
Thank you very much. Last night, I went into Fire Station 56 in my district and visited, and it was kind of like a crossfire. It was somewhat very inquisitive about what's going on at City Hall, what's going on with the firefighters. That being said, I don't want to violate the city attorney here, but in discussing these issues here, we came up with what it costs to operate. And there's about, at an engine company with paramedics, about $1.5 million to pay for that. In that particular station, there's 8 firefighters. It's a heavy rescue. The point I'm making here, which I've asked for and asked for and asked for, what's it cost to run a regional rec center? What's it cost to run a neighborhood rec center? What are those dollars? We should post them. If we're going to get the public to support us in this downtime, we got to say. I went by Silver Lake Rec Center the other day, Mr. Garcetti, on the weekend, and it was teeming with families. And they were like 3- and 4-year-old kids playing basketball. And nothing was more exciting to watch these kids. They let them double dribble. It's a lot of fun, girls and boys playing. But it was great. But what if that was closed? Where would they all be? Okay, we need to know what the costs are as we make these reductions so we can call on, whether it's the neighborhood associations, friends of groups, others, to have equity across the city to be able to try to keep some of this activity going. I mentioned Queen Anne Friday night. There were 500 people in Queen Anne. Opening girls softball run by Wilshire Softball, not a Reckitt Park group, but a local group that has been able to do it. There's some of these groups that step up and be able to do that. On Thursday, members, and I'll send another notice around, our committee, Mr. Reyes and I, and Mr. Wesson, Arts, Parks, and Health and Aging, will see Mr. Muckery across the table. And you're welcome to come, Mr. Rosendahl, as we drill it down. I appreciate your passion last night as you communicated to me how people feel horrible about this. I know, though, from that standpoint, there's a lot of misinformation out, and I mentioned this before, that we do have a website, or we have an official word of the CAO or the personnel department, or what is the status? Because I'm sure in this era of uncertainty of time and change, where we are calling for great cuts, is there any information that we could get out that does calm the situation? Is there something? Because there's a lot of misinformation. I heard from a director of a rec center said they're going from that they were told by their managers they're going to be demoted. Now, I don't believe anybody's being demoted in this, are they, Maggie?
Well, theoretically, they could be demoted as a result of layoffs.
Of the layoffs.
They could
and not be
displace.
demoted of service, but because of the layoffs,
Right.
because the positions are removing.
Right, and we do have a website that describes what a layoff is. It also provides information regarding employee assistance. We have a number of people who are very stressed by this situation. We are enlisting the departments as it relates to identifying potential workplace violence. So we are anticipating and attempting to be as proactive as we possibly can to allay the fears. However, the fact of the matter is these are scary times, and we're not in a position to be able to guarantee anything because we we honestly don't know what the impact is going to be on each and every employee.
Right, and when do we think we would know? When we adopt a budget for the next fiscal year?
I think once the budget's adopted, then it's going to provide the roadmap on how we're going to proceed for the next fiscal year. And so that's going to be the most significant milestone in giving some clarity as to what this means and what it doesn't. There's still going to be significant disequilibrium because there's going to be a whole series of displacements that's going to be occurring throughout the city during that time, but it should provide sort of a blueprint as to where we're headed.
Thank you, Mr. LaBonge. Our next speaker is Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Council President. Mr. Santana, when we talk about these reports, in terms of process, are we waiting for the department heads to give us a sense of what options could be made available in terms of preserving the services versus preserving the jobs versus preserving whatever strategies they think is a priority? Is that what we're doing now, or is this the time where we as council members should be putting forth recommendations and strategies? I mean, how do you see this process unfolding from here on out?
Well, I think I speak for myself as the general manager, but from what I've heard from my colleagues, is understanding the priorities that you have is critical. I met with all the GMs on Friday, and one of the things I asked them to do as we prepare for the budget is to establish what they understand the priorities are in their department, so that as we begin to make reductions, that we do everything we can to preserve those things that are the core and work backwards from those things that, while important, are not the most important. What I would recommend that within the context of your committees, that you engage your general managers in the same kind of conversation to make sure that there's an alignment of what those priorities are.
But to help that discussion, for example, in the planning department, sharing a plum, we know that there are certain deadlines we have to meet given our fiscal realities. So from here to June, there's so many weeks. Implementation for the following budget means certain actions have to be taken. Are they aware of those deadlines? Or is that something that comes from the mayor's office? I mean, how is those intricate details being delivered so that we know how to pose the question? One of my motions last week was to ask the CLA and the CAO to give the chairpersons a set of questions that could create some uniformity in how the answers and the data comes back to you. And so I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do we start structuring some format that allows us to move forward as opposed to having an avalanche of information coming at you in different formats? How do you process? So that's what I'm trying to get a handle on.
Got it. I think in response to your motion, I think we're close to being done to establishing sort of a template so that all the information that's generated from your committees comes in some coordinated fashion. That should be done this week. In addition to that, as part of the budget process, the mayor and the CAO's office has meetings with every general manager when we go through much of what you're talking about. And so what we would hope would happen is that it would be the general manager who would present within the context of the meetings of your committee as well as in the meetings with the mayor in our office the same kind of priorities, the same kind of ideas as to how to identify other ways of doing business, like what was shared with by Councilman Rosendahl in terms of public-private partnerships in the parks, as well as a clear understanding of what the impact will be as a result of these reductions. It's one of the things that needs to be clear is that in many cases, we won't be able to mitigate that impact. And so we will have to be honest to say it normally takes us 10 days to process something. Now it's going to take us 20 days to do that. And that's hopefully what comes out of that, too.
I think the last point I want to make is this harsh reality is going to move everybody out of the comfort zone. And I'm speaking to the parents that are out there who are worried about where does my child stay during the latchkey hours when no one's at home. This means that the parents are going to have to step up and help us with some level of participation to keep these parks functioning. It means that, and I'm not sure this is a sensitive issue to touch on, but it means that readdressing how the unions are interacting with these contracts, these relationships, so that we can save more jobs later. It breaks my heart to know that we have to go after that number, which is a very big number, 4,000. But if we don't do this now, we're going to lose more later.
Right.
And for me, it's about saving jobs. And I know that does not sound very, how can I say this, genuine, but the truth is, if we don't do this now, we're going to lose more jobs later. And that's something that we need to come to grips with. So I'm challenging everyone that sees these priorities as a priority to ask themselves, what do I do to make these services exist, and how do I participate and really push folks out of their comfort margin? And that's something that we need to all engage, instead of sitting back and saying, well, how does this benefit me, and how much less do I have to do to maintain my comfort margin? And I think it's going to push everybody into another role, and that's going to be, I think, the tension we'll be feeling for the next few months, if not years.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Mr. Smith, followed by Mr. Cardenas.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I just happened to have sent an email yesterday to Mr. Muckery, which I'd like to read his response on this very point. He said, here's the deal. Citywide, we have 910 children enrolled in licensed child care. It cost us $7 million. We collect $2 million. We lose $5 million on this program. Once we fully burden expenses, we would need to charge approximately $1,200 a month. On average, we charge $250 a month. So we are subsidizing that from the general fund. He says at some centers we charge a little more, some centers a little less. The state has also cut a major grant, so there is virtually no way to become self-sustaining citywide. I can tell you, in 1980 and 81, I was chairman of the board of the YMCA in our area. We went from 4 daycare centers to 7. It was a big jump for us. That YMCA now runs 32 daycare centers on LA Unified campuses, LAU high school campuses. That cuts the cost tremendously, because there's no rent. There's virtually no rent issues for the YMCA. I think we need to look, as we look at private partnerships, that there are options out there, are very successful options. YMCA, YWCA, in the private sector, KinderCare, all which run very successful programs. But none of them charge $250. I got news for you. We are subsidizing excessively our program, and we can't afford to do that. And I think we need to look at those private organizations. I know the YMCA my Y raises about $1 million a year to subsidize those who have grant needs, those that are families in need. But I know some of the wealthy areas of my district, one of which has a daycare center, we're subsidizing a huge amount of money for people who can afford to pay $800 or $1,000 a month. I don't think we have a system that we've really proven is very effective. Some things government does well, some they don't. And when we look at competitive nature of government versus the private sector, it appears that the nonprofit sector can do a much better job. It has been my experience that the YMCA in my district does that. I know the YWCA, which is in Mr. Carden's district, I think, does that. There are much better models out there we need to move to. But those were the numbers that Mr. Muckery gave us. We run a system that's $7 million. We collect $2. We're obviously not doing a very good job, and we need to look at those other models as options. And if we can let them use our facilities at no cost or $1 a year, and then run their programs out of it, we maintain the programs, which are all of our concerns, and let them run it at a better way, and really reduce the cost factor to them, which is what Y has done by moving 32 facilities in my district alone into LAUSD campuses. So there are better models. That's where we need to go. As far as what's happening out there, it is my understanding that there are union people trying to stir up the dust. There's going to be changes. We all know that as we get to the 4,000 layoffs. These will be some of those people, obviously, and there will be a huge service impact. So we need to move quickly off the model we're in to the private sector model. Thank you.
Mr. Cardenas, followed by Ms. Perry.
Maggie and Miguel specifically, you've been talking in front of the council, sitting at that table, briefing council members, policymakers for the city, probably more intensely over the last 60 days than you probably did in any 60-day period since either one of you have been with the city. I bring that up because I want to point out to everybody that in those 60 days, how much of that dialogue and that news that you've been giving us, policymakers, is good news? Or has it been, by and large, pretty bad news?
Pretty bad.
Pretty bad news,
Yes.
right? A lot of information that's probably not music to anyone's ears. Whether you're a union leader or a policymaker or a worker who's been here for 30, 40 years or somebody who's been here for only a year or two. It's really heavy dialogue, right? It's something that's not pleasant. It's something that is, you're just trying to give us the facts, right?
That's correct.
And the reason why I ask you those questions is because I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your professionalism. Because it's really important for people to understand. Like I said, it's not music to anyone's ears when you sit there and tell us, Maggie, for example, okay, if you want to make the policy decision to move 20-some hundred people on an early retirement system, that's going to take time, energy, technicalities. We have to make sure we're doing it legally properly. We cannot miss a step, or we're trying our best not to miss a step, because there's lives involved, families, positions, liability, all those kinds of things. Are those the kinds of things that you have to keep in mind when you're doing your work, Maggie?
Yes.
Absolutely. On a day-to-day basis, to the tune of hundreds and hundreds of those decisions every single day. Moving parts all the time, correct?
Correct.
Okay, now Miguel, for example, you're tasked with letting the mayor know and the city council and the public know what the picture is with the city of Los Angeles when it comes to its revenue and our expenditures, and giving us advice on what kind of things we should think about or the kinds of options we have on making decisions to try to bring that into balance. Isn't that at the core of what your main responsibility is?
Yes.
Okay, what's your title again?
City Administrative Officer.
City Administrative Officer. The reason why I want to bring that out is because I think it's lost on the public, and with all due respect, I think it's lost on the press as I'm reading another article. It says City Council targets unlicensed dogs. It just happens to be the title. You know, that's an important issue, and we talked about it a few minutes ago, and it's a place, fortunately, if everything works out well, we can actually garner millions of dollars that are missing and actually save the lives of animals with that money. It's a wonderful thing. But really what we're talking about, Maggie and Miguel, we're talking about billions of dollars that we're having to manage. And if we don't manage that well, we can be in bigger trouble. The news could only get worse. The number of people that we would have to target or positions to eliminate would be far beyond the 4,000 that we're even talking about today. Could the situation get worse? Could it? I'm not saying will it or will it not. Could it get worse?
Yes.
Okay. The reason why I ask you that question is because I really think we need to keep focusing on all the things that we have to do, the smaller decisions, the more detailed decisions, but at the same time keep balancing the bigger picture here. And the reason why I want to point that out is because people are complaining a lot about the city council or about the mayor, or the mayor says something with the city council doing the right thing or what have you. But the bottom line is doing the right thing is exactly what's going on right now. It's exactly what's going on right now. We have to go through the details. We have to do it, and because we're a body that's subject to the Brown Act, we have to do it in public. And we are doing it in public. And whether people like it or not, most people in this city eat sausage. It's just something that we eat. But if you actually wanted to know the exact ingredients of what's in that sausage, or you actually got to look at the sausage making, you probably wouldn't eat sausage again. However, somebody goes through a lot of painstaking work to try to work with what they have and create that sausage so that it's something that is able to be consumed. With all due respect, that's what we're doing here on the council. We are actually taking what we have to work with. We have a budget that's shrinking by hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars a year. We have pensions, because of the world market, etc., that are costing the general fund of the city hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars more on top of what we've had to pay in pensions a year. Miguel, what is the trajectory of the pension obligation from the general fund of the city of Los Angeles from last year? What was it that we were obligated to put in there from the general fund? And then this year and next year, what's the projection in the next?
Last year?
Round figures.
Last year, I think it was approximately $400 million. this year is over 500 million, and next year is going to be over 700 million.
And the following year, we actually could reach $1 billion.
Correct.
Yeah, $1 billion. And what's the general fund right now as it stands? About 4.1 billion-ish?
Yes, 4.1, yes.
Yeah. So that's a big chunk of that. Again, that's what we have to work with, whether we like it or not. That's what we have to work with. And then the council president just mentioned that we got downgraded. Was that what I heard? We got downgraded again by one of the rating agencies?
Yes, we haven't received the official report yet, but we were just notified by telephone that Standard & Poor's has downgraded us from a AA in our general credit to a AA minus.
Now, in a rolling 12-month period, to round it off to the nearest $20 million or what have you, how much could or would that impact us even further beyond the reduction of the money we can use for the things that we'd like to use it for?
Millions of dollars, and we won't know exactly what the impact will be till we go out to the market in terms of what higher interest we're likely to pay. We go out to the market in the next several weeks on our judgment obligation bonds, which we're assuming we're going to receive as part of our budget. So if we don't, then that creates even a bigger problem. And so, but it's as a result of the downgrade, the negative watch from last week, it's going to cost us millions of dollars more to borrow as a standard way of operating. In addition to the general credit downgrade, we also were downgraded for MICLA, the convention center credit, and from that category, we went from a AA to an actual drop in an entire category to an A+.
Okay. Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Perry, followed by Mr. Parks.
Thanks, Mr. Chair and Mr. Santana. I wanted to continue having you discuss the downgrade and what this means, and also in the context of the vote we took last week, the 9-3 vote we took last week,
We're talking about the downgrade.
to increase the layoff number up to 4,000 as an affirmative act. And I'm not really clear, after we've taken this action, and it was definitive, it was on the record, it was a public vote, why are we receiving this downgrade now?
Well, I think in what we've been hearing back from our rating agencies, that they're concerned about the significant drop in revenue, which we don't control. So it's obviously a direct correlation with the recession. They're concerned about having to rely so significantly in our reserve to be able to end this year in the black. And they're concerned with the steps that we're moving forward on. At least with Standard & Poor's, they acknowledge that we've taken some steps. They're concerned about whether or not they actually get it done.
Okay, now let me interrupt you. What do you mean actually get it done? I'm not sure what that means.
Well, I think they recognize that it's important that we've outlined a roadmap of how we're going to address the problem that we have, and they actually did not put us on negative watch because they indicated that they're optimistic that we're going to be able to close next year's budget deficit. But they want to see action. They want to make sure that the plan that we've laid out actually reaches fruition and is completed.
And that means, what does fruition mean?
It means that the specific number of position eliminations that your council has approved, that they actually be eliminated.
All right, now, if they're eliminated and people are transferred, will that move us up or move us down?
The transfer really...
Is that not a factor?
I mean, I don't think they really pay attention to how we do it. What they want to know, we've shared with them when we heard news about this yesterday, that your council has directed for the elimination of 4,000 positions. What the next question they'll be asking when they review us again is, did you reduce those 4,000 positions? How we do it, whether they're transferred, whether they're laid off, that's really not something that they care about. They want to know, their question is going to be very direct. Did you eliminate those positions as part of your strategy to reduce the deficit?
And is it elimination of those positions within a given time frame?
Well, within the context, we presented them as a solution
Other than the fiscal
to
year.
next year's fiscal problem. So they specifically would want to know if we've engaged in that work to generate the savings, which we told them is between $260 and $300 million to mitigate more than half of the problem we're facing for next year. I'll have Natalie add anything more.
One of the things, Natalie Brill, the City Administrative Officer, one of the things that they specifically talked about was our ability to reach a structural balance. That over the last few years, we've been talking about it, but that the steps necessary have not been taken to reach a structural balance. They did talk about, with me on the phone, some of the position, some of the cuts that we've been making, and they consider that a step towards structural balance. I mean, for them, that's what it's about. Do our expenditures and our revenues coincide?
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Parks.
Thank you, Mr. President. Miguel, I'd just like to ask, when we were in Budget and Finance Committee looking at the FSR, you commented that you were looking at cuts that only represent about 30% of the budget, and you said we needed you to give us recommendations for the 100% of the budget. And I heard you comment today that you've made a similar comment. Are we going to get that review by you for the 100% of the budget?
Well, in response to your request back then, we submitted a memo that outlined the other areas that we did not recommend but that are available to you, which included funds that are controlled by your council, also included reductions in the police department, including what the layoffs of probationary police officers will look like, as well as if we were to stop hiring, how much would be saved in that context.
Okay, so has the council reviewed that, or has it been calendared?
It was presented to your council prior to the adoption of the FSR, I believe. And it was all alternatives in response to your memo. I think there were some questions as well that Councilman Weezer had asked in terms of what else we could do this year to mitigate the dip into the reserve fund. I'll be happy to resend that to you.
Is that the Weezer motion that's on today?
No, that was presented, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. Let me ask, Mr. President, is it possible, is that the one that was, I guess it was 10BB or something, we went through the whole alphabet?
I don't remember.
Anyone have that information for Councilman Parks? Mr. Clerk, would you have it?
100% review of the budget. What was
Mr. Miller?
The motion one that had those. Let me ask, Mr. President, if we could ask that item that was presented as part of the FSR, I don't think was ever reviewed by the council, if we can, in one of our budget days, get that calendared so that we can discuss the broader view, because I think what the problem that we have, and we've sensed it in Budget and Finance, is giving Mr. Santana the job of looking at fixing the budget in only 30% of the allocations causes him to give us recommendations that we can quibble over but may not get us to the point. And we really need to look at the entire 100% of the budget so that we can either say yay or nay, but not just keep him spinning his wheels on the 30% and making recommendations that often we wonder if are in conflict to our future interests, but again, we have to realize what limitations we've given him. So if we can ask that item and we can give us the CF number. And did you say that the Weezer motion asked for additional information?
There was two questions. One, you had asked at Budget and Finance that night, if you had no restrictions, what other options would we have? We responded to that. And it was presented prior to the adoption of the FSR. And then Councilman Weezer asked, what else can we do to mitigate the dip in the reserve? And our response to that was very similar to the one that we sent you, but I'll be happy to...
Okay. But now, has that response been put in writing before the council?
Yes, it was.
Before the one, Weezer's motion?
Yes, it was presented.
I'd ask that both of those items, if we can get those on the agenda.
Mr. Clerk, do you have that?
Did you find it?
No, I mean, you can get it. Okay, the clerk will get it. All right, great.
I have him here if you want the council number.
Yeah, why don't we get that to the clerk and see if we can get that scheduled at one of our future meetings.
Okay, he'll follow up on that. Thank you. Mr. Alarcon's our next speaker. Oh, Mr. Labange, you had a question?
Point of clarification. If wages were reduced, would that have an impact on Moody's rating? That's a point of clarification.
Well, it's, again, what Moody's and all of our bond rating agencies are looking for is action. And last year, earlier this year, when we faced a $400 million deficit, they wanted to make sure that we had a plan to address it. And so, in that case, instead of layoffs, we did the early retirement program and negotiated concessions with our bargaining units. Again, the alternative to layoffs, or another piece that we could look at, is across-the-board reduction. If we were to do a 10% reduction across the board with everybody, including our sworn personnel, we would be able to generate approximately $300 million. What Moody's, I think, and Natalie could certainly elaborate on this, what we would share with Moody's is that that's the equivalent value of the layoffs. So it will mitigate the shortfall in the same way that 3,000 or 4,000 layoffs would have in the same way.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Alarcon.
I don't like bond raters. I don't think they've been doing good for the country in the last 10 years. I think they've been a horrible assessment of our economy, and because of them, we've seen millions of people foreclosed upon. So I don't trust them. I don't like them. I think they're cronies for the stock market, and yet we're subject to their decisions. And it's like I just wanted to say for the record that they got a gun to our head, and we're negotiating not because we like it, nor do we even respect these people, but we respect them in the context that just because they say they don't like us, people will not invest in Los Angeles. And I think that's wrong. That's what's wrong with the system. That's why I've been calling for us to work with the League of Cities to establish an entirely separate bond rating and objective bond rating agency. And that's really where we need to go. But that is not today. Today we've got to deal with these people who gave the Lehman Brothers a good rating just before they went under and ripped off billions of dollars. So I don't trust these guys. Notwithstanding that, I also want to point out that they're not saying that we have to lay off anybody. They're saying we have to take action. They're more concerned, they're more upset about the fact that our calculations were off by $200 million. That's their primary concern, was that we did not calculate the revenue generated from this economy last year. So we keep throwing it on the workers when, in fact, they saved us money last year. We keep throwing it on the workers when even if we lay off 4,000 or say we're going to lay off 4,000, they still lower our bond rating. That action didn't mean anything to them. That didn't mean anything to them because it wasn't substantive. It didn't actually reduce the expenditures. And so it was just a cry in the dark, and they gave it to us just like they gave it to every foreclosure victim in the country. What do you think they're going to do when we dip into our reserves by $200 million? Do you think they're not going to hammer us again? Of course they are. So let's quit suggesting musical chairs types of approaches to solving our problems here. The truth is that if we don't find new sources of revenue, they're going to stick it to us again, and they better be real. I believe that there are new sources of revenue that can be found in the uncollected debt, the $400 million that people owe us, and in the ARA dollars. And I will say this: the CAO and Jim Clark from the mayor's office have changed their tune with regard to ARA, but we need to insert that into our budget and calculate how many jobs we can save as a result of ARA dollars, calculate it in our budget, and argue with with these bond raters, that is an absolute, that we will create city jobs as a result of the ARA funding, but we need to insert it in our budget. To date, we have not inserted any positions in our budget, and we already have created 272 to date. I anticipate that next year we will create another 500 to 1,000 ARA positions if we do the right work. That's where our focus should be. But this musical chairs game of let's pick a figure out of the air and say we're going to lay people off when in fact we're not going to lay off 4,000, nowhere near 4,000, is not going to affect the bond raters because they're out to get us. They want our money and they want to rip off so the stock market will take our money to New York.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn, followed by Mr. Koretz.
Well said, Mr. Alarcon. Yeah, I feel better too. I was going to go back to the discussion that we were having about public-private partnerships with our facilities. As we know, this would require MOUs, apparently, with some of these entities to come into our facilities and run the programs. Is that correct? Is that what we're thinking? So this is a whole city attorney thing. This is, I can just, see the bureaucratic red tape that we're going to need to cut to enter into partnerships with nonprofits to come into our facilities and run the programs. So, on that note, what I'm asking you, maybe can you put together within a week what specific points would need to be included in an MOU, say, with a Boys and Girls Club, a YMCA, a Little League, to come into our facilities and actually run some of our, I'm thinking of parks, some of these programs. Because I know every time we've ever tried to kind of enter into these, which we have, I have some examples in San Pedro. We had a Field of Dreams, and we've entered into an MOU with AYSO. But, as I recall, it's always difficult to kind of fill those out and get the I's dotted and the T's crossed. So maybe if we're going to move in that direction, then we need to be prepared to see how we actually could make that happen. And again, I can just hear the city attorney on some of these. So I just think, these are all good ideas. We're talking about them, but if you could have maybe back to us within a week what if we wanted to begin going and approaching some of these entities who are already running programs in our communities, and now maybe it's an opportunity for them to come into our facilities and run those same programs. What is that going to look like? What's that MOU going to look like? Why don't we start getting those at least prepared so that if that's the direction we want to take, we'll be ready to do that. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, I understand that. I would be surprised if we already don't have
a template?
Well, not just a template, an actual MOU with some of the same organization you just cited. I know Mr. Muckery just walked in. Maybe he could help clarify.
John, front and center. It's taking a long time on my time to walk up there. Yeah, no, there it goes.
Did you hear the question?
That's why I got 6 minutes last time.
Well, you're
John,
16 seconds, Ms. Hahn.
I think what we've been talking about this morning was the idea of if these eliminations of positions, particularly in rec and parks, go forward, which again many of us are still trying to resist, but is there an opportunity to maybe partner with some of these other agencies out there, whether it be Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, the YWCA, some of these entities, AYSO, Little Leagues, to actually come into our facilities and begin running some of the things that we've been doing, for instance, after school. And my question was, do we have MOUs, a template already that we've entered into with some of these agencies? Do you see this as being, problematic? Or if we did go in that direction, I'm not saying we are, but if we do, are we prepared to quickly enter into these, legally safe partnerships with some of these nonprofits in our community?
Okay, there's three separate things I heard. One is if. It's not going to be an if. We are going to have to take cuts. It's inevitable. The cuts will be done surgically as we can. I want you to know right now, I've cut 25% of my senior executive management staff already. I've cut 63% of my next level supervision through ERIPS. We're now down into that level where we will see service delivery stopping from the City of LA. Your second question was, can we do this through public-private partnerships? The answer is yes. I don't know how quickly we can do this. Most of the private agencies that I'm dealing with have the same capacity problems we do, the same cost problems we do, the same liability problems we do. We actually have templates. We are working on our
I think that's good. I think if what you say is true, that you are already making cuts in your department, we will see reduction of services. I think we then need to move quickly on this other idea. But I will tell you, I have experience with trying to hire goats to cut weeds and in one of our parks. It was the most frustrating, problematic, bureaucratic nightmare that I was ever engaged in. And you know it. And you know what the, quote, MOU looked like and what prevented... He had 27 seconds when he was walking out.
I know, we're two and a half minutes over.
You know what I'm saying. You know exactly what I'm saying. So we got to figure out if we really want to do this, we're going to have to get the city attorneys at the table with your folks at the table to get this template that actually is a workable document.
Thank you.
Because in the past, I have not found that to be true working with your department and the city attorney.
Well, we're not hiring goats here.
And
We're
Mr. Zine is our next
people.
speaker. Mr. Zine. Did you press your button, Mr. Zine?
Yes, I did. I just, briefly, Mr. Muckery, I serve with the YMCA Board of Directors, and I just had a meeting with the Boy Scouts yesterday. They're all hurting for funds. They're all hurting for sponsorship and scholarship, and I think it's a wonderful idea Ms. Hahn has mentioned, but as you know, those other organizations that serve the community are all financially in not good shape. So if we would ask the YMCA or the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts or any other community group to come help take over some of those programs, they're already stretched to the maximum. Unless we can provide some funding or get some funding from the state, which obviously won't come forward, or from the federal government, but they're all in the same boat. They're all struggling for survival. Meeting with the Boy Scouts yesterday, they're trying to find sponsorship so they can keep the scouting programs active. Again, the YMCA has a lot of scholarships. They're increasing the scholarships, but they're running out of sponsors so they can provide those. So while we want to maintain the programs, whether it's child care, as Mr. Koretz has stated, they're all wonderful programs. And if we turn to the private sector to help fund them, they're going to throw their hands up and say, we're hurting like everyone else. I mean, we can't just abandon, but we do what we can do. They're all hurting for money. I just want to emphasize that point.
That's correct, but you've hired me to look at service delivery, and what we are working with the mayor's office and the CAO is determine core functions on a priority basis. Now, it won't be an easy line. It's not going to be a straight line as if you're going into surgery. Many of our communities cannot be self-sustaining, and I'll be up here fighting for equity across the city until I'm blue in the face. But we are looking at public-private partnerships. We have many fine models out there. Hearts of Los Angeles at Lafayette Park is a model agency that's trying to be duplicated across the United States. Let's not forget, the Department of Recreation and Parks of Los Angeles what everybody is benchmarking against. We are not a laggard in any of this.
Mr. Koretz.
Yeah, I have some questions about whether we've taken all the costs of layoffs into account as we're doing these calculations. Have we taken into account the 5.7% raise we have to give to the coalition, and how much is that amount?
Tom will be up here in a second to help answer that.
Hopefully it won't wipe out all my time to get this one question answered, because I've got two or three that are similar in the same vein. While you're looking at that, I'd also ask whether we've calculated the 5.7% increase to the coalition members who, even though they're not getting laid off, have a Me Too clause. So they would also get a 5.7% raise, and whether we've calculated the increased pension costs of those raises and what that all adds up to.
We have calculated in our deficit for next year, the COLAs for those people who are eligible to receive them as a result of whatever we've negotiated. So when I talk about the 485, it assumes those COLAs.
What are those amounts, though?
For the coalition, the COLA amount is $31 million, and the 2.75 step is 12, so roughly $43 million for the year.
How much for the folks represented by the Police Protective League?
What we have for Police Protective League is a 0 for next year.
I'm not sure that's correct. I think we may be missing the calculation, because my understanding is that with their Me Too clause, they would also get the 5.7% raise.
That does not apply to them.
Are we clear on that? Because that's not my reading of it.
Absolutely 100% certain on that issue. The Me Too clause did not apply to agreements that pre-existed theirs.
If we negotiated the PPL agreement this year, and the coalition COLAs had already been negotiated, the Me Too clause applied if we were to negotiate any new COLAs beyond after the agreement with PPL. So those had already been agreed upon early, prior to.
But the other part, the 40-odd million, that includes the pension costs as well.
Yes.
And I don't know, as far as the parks, this is a less quantifiable issue, but I know we have made some of our parks passive in the past and had cost problems in terms of them becoming drug havens and gang controlled and severely graffitied and damaged, and a lot of costs after the fact in undoing all those problems. Have we taken those kinds of problems into consideration as well, that when we hit better times and we try to restore those services, what those costs will be and whether there really is a long-term net savings to it?
That actually is an excellent question. Yes, we have. We are working on a long-term strategic plan. As we start looking at becoming more passive, we have to look at how we patrol the parks, how we light the parks, and what we're going to do when times get better. Because we're going to anticipate that we're going to be out of this economy and people are going to demand recreation. It should also be known that we're not operating in a vacuum. We went from roughly 71,000 registered kids in our daily programs to over 100,000 every single day in the summertime. The communities are demanding more services now, not less.
And so in those calculations, we've assumed in our numbers the capital costs of restoring damaged parks and the costs, the policing costs of keeping drug dealers out or retaking them from drug dealers and gang members.
I think we've changed our whole way of managing parks from when Prop 13 hit rather suddenly. So we'll have more early warning on that. We have more patrols to the Office of Public Safety and LAPD. I don't envision that to be a problem because we will attack it as they occur. Your questions are what happens if we do have to shut down a park that has a fixed facility and it becomes vandalized. Yes, we do have cost estimates on what that will cost.
And that's in our calculations.
Mr. Kretz, if I can ask you to press your button again. We're about 2 minutes over, so I gave a little credit for the walking time. But
okay.
Thank you. Mr. Rosendahl?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Kretz, for what you just asked there. First of all, Miguel, take a deep breath and tell us where we're going to be over the next 3 or 4 months. Your best case scenario of what we need to do and worst case scenario.
Next 3 or 4 months, we will have adopted a budget which addresses our entire shortfall, $585 million. Given the direction that we received, about $300 million of that will be by the elimination of positions. And and then the other nearly $200 million will be done through some form of borrowing that we're going to have to engage in. Hopefully, we can mitigate the percentage of the borrowing by identifying other revenues as the ones that have been discussed as it relates to establishing a target. We'll know in 3 or 4 months how much we hope to save as a result of reducing all contracts by at least 10%. We'll know how much we'll save by having a real plan to go after those individuals who haven't paid taxes. We'll also have a better sense of any other revenue that have been explored by your council, for everything from ambulance billing. So whatever my goal is, to borrow the least amount, and those various elements that have been described so far will help mitigate that. But when we start the new fiscal year, we should be in a place where we know exactly what we're cutting, the operational impact for that. We've established a strategy to mitigate those impacts to the extent that we can. We've established strengthened our credibility with our bond rating agency, so they understand that we have a plan in place and have implemented that plan, and spend the next year essentially implementing the budget that your council has adopted and working on the various initiatives in the 3-year plan to generate savings and efficiencies for the following years. That is my hope in terms of the most optimistic place that we're in. There are very difficult decisions and actions that have to take place to get there, but the goal is to be in a place in the next 3 months where we understand very clearly what we've done and where we're going. The worst case scenario is where we don't know those things, where we're still in a situation like we were this year, where we adopt a budget that has a huge hole in it. We begin the new fiscal year working on fixing that hole, and we don't really adopt any solutions to address that hole until the late summer, early fall. So we don't generate the kind of savings that we anticipated to mitigate that hole. Doing that will result in a higher interest rate to engage in our day-to-day borrowing, which we do early in the year to pay off our pension costs. Will limit our abilities to engage in whatever borrowing we need to do to address the gap, and will further deteriorate the confidence that our bond rating agencies have in our ability to address our structural deficit. That's the worst case scenario.
Very articulate. The $300 million that you said is the 4,000 jobs, correct?
That is correct.
Is there any way to lessen that 4,000 jobs by what Mr. Alarcon talked about, bringing in $100 million from those damn parking lots, or being at the 10% on all contracts, or be it some other operational efficiencies? Do you see any part of that $300 million going down, meaning less individuals will be given pink
It's very
slips?
difficult because even with the $300 million, we still have a $185 million problem. And so all of these solutions for revenue will go into resolving that part of the problem. The garages are critical. I forgot to mention our reserve fund. Under the best case scenario, we will have a reserve fund in the next 3 to 4 months that is close to $150 to $200 million through the results of work that has been done by your council, as well as the garage, the leasing out of our garages. That money needs to be pocketed away for our reserve so that we restore it as soon as possible.
Thank you for that. And I know, Mr. President, there's only one question, but I'll come back again for Mr. Muckery, which I want to ask.
Thank you. Mr. LaBonge is our next speaker.
I ask John Muckery and Gene Adams to join us at the center table. And I think, Mr. Santana, you did articulate it earlier, but just to articulate, maybe Mr. Muckery will have it, it's 0.00 7654 of our property tax. What is the set aside for you? Because your budget is what, and what is the property tax set aside?
Okay, the Recreation and Parks and the Library gets a percentage of property tax valuation. Currently, that is $140 million. This current fiscal year, we anticipated, even in this dire economy, to go up to about $141 million direct appropriations from property tax next year.
Okay, and that's right there. But what's your budget also? That's both you and library?
Well, libraries has a little different formula, it's a little less, but we have, in the charter, we both have a funding floor property tax valuation.
And it's 140 for Rec and Parks?
$140 million this fiscal year.
And what is your budget to do what you do?
Our budget is approximately $177 million for this fiscal year. 86% of that is labor, direct labor charges, and the rest goes to other things. The biggest thing that impacted us this year was $25 million direct charges for utilities and fleet.
Right.
So from the $177 million, even though it's a lot of money, I have got to already subtract $25 million. That's up front.
Now, does the Controller's Office provide Silver Lake Rec Center, it costs you XYZ to operate, Point Center Rec Center, Cole Playground? Does it provide a breakdown like that?
No, our current financial management system doesn't have that level of detail, but it will.
I got that. Well, let me ask you, Mr. CAO, we got to do that in the future, because what I'd like to say to John, I'd like to go fight Water and Power, that you don't have to pay for the money, because I'm sure many of your parklands, including Griffith Park, have transmission through there, have franchises through there, that you should get some revenue, and there should be some trade-off in that. And I think when Mr. Park sat over on this side of the council, we had that discussion to look at that opportunity to try to offset the cost. I got him to smile a little right there, just a little. But I think we got to look at breaking each breaking each facility down. If FedEx could tell you where your shoes are, or where your purchase is in the world, when they're moving it around the country, we certainly should know what it costs to run each center. With that being said, John, the foundation is now moving with better steps. Mr. Sanders, your commission president, created it. Okay. What do you see, what do you vision in September of this year at your facilities?
If we continue to go the way we are with more indirect exposure, we have another $5 million that we're going to be liable for as part of the current ERIP package. It's going to be hard to tell you what my financial liability will be if we are forced to lay off people. We probably will be closing facilities 1 or 2, maybe 3 days a week.
And will they be on the weekends?
My goal is to keep Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays open.
Right, where the people are.
Correct.
Right, okay. Members, again, our committee will have this. Mr. Reyes and I, Mr. Wesson, will be, I don't want to call it drilling down the numbers, but hearing the story a little better so we could possibly come with solutions to the council on how this very impactful budget will affect what is a silent, beautiful part. When I say silent, you were not here, John, but there were about 500 people at Queen Anne, including, which you encouraged, Wilshire Softball, which is a community softball program for girls. There was at least 1,000 in MacArthur Park when I drove past on Friday, and a whole bunch at Lafayette, just on Friday in our parks. The people are there. It's People for Parks. We don't want a mow and blow park organization. We want to have an engaging experience, but at the time, we got to limit it. And also, the thing, too, that we got to realize is senior citizens need the parks 5 days a week, because that's when they meet, yet the youth are in school. Summertime they're not, but youth are at school, so we could maybe do Saturday, Sunday on that. So there's some conflicts, and there's a variety of things that have to be figured out.
I agree with you. We are working on that. We have a strategic plan in place. We actually met over this weekend with my staff to come out with cost estimates. I think some things that we failed to look at Rec and Parks is the fact that in the 1940s we were designated as safe refuge during time of war. That now became to national emergencies. We have got to figure out a plan where we don't lose long-term this ability to provide critical services. I think sometimes we forget that we are as much part of public safety as any agency. We are there 365 days a year.
Well, it's cops and coaches, John. That's what it takes, cops and coaches. And you have great coaches that do that. So I look for that aspect. We'll have a good, hearty session on Thursday at 2 o'clock and come back to you. And what I really want to know, give us a rough, what it costs to operate a Pan Pacific, which is a large regional, and what it costs to operate a small neighborhood rec center, so we can also inform the public, because if you inform the public, there's a possibility someone could step up some grants and others to help us.
Again, I'm going to say one thing, equity. I don't mind that. If somebody wants to take on a Pan Pacific, they better be willing to take on a South Park. Because when I took over this department, we had a definite divide between the haves and the have-nots. We've been forcing equity across the city. So the same program that goes on in the valley goes on in the center of LA.
You just got to figure the formula,
Mr. LeBron,
John.
we're going to ask you to press your button.
I know,
again,
I'm
too.
way over
Okay?
time. I
So,
thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much.
President.
Mr. Cardenas?
Thank you, Miss.
Shut them down.
Mr. Cardenas.
Thank you very much. As I was saying earlier, you're watching sausage being made. It's not pretty, but this is what we have to work with. I think this is a great opportunity for the public to understand that whether it's council members or mayors or neighborhood councils or anybody, when they talk about, well, we ought to just handle core services. We ought to just figure out what are the core services that the city wants to be involved in. Well, guess what? We don't get to do what we want when it's government. We have to do what needs to get done. For example, I'm glad you said that, Mr. Muckery, and I hope to hear that from the police chief and the mayor and every elected official in this city and across the country, that when it comes to public safety, I was talking to my colleague here, Councilmember Alarcon. We both grew up in the Northeast San Fernando Valley. We both represent the Northeast San Fernando Valley, not the most affluent area of Los Angeles or even the most affluent part of this country. However, when it comes to parks, facilities, if you close down a park in certain neighborhoods, like portions of my district or Councilmember Alarcon's district or maybe Reyes's district and other people's districts, what happens, what could or would happen if we had to force you to close down a 10-acre, 20, 30, 40-acre facility where you have no people there on those grounds who are taking care of it, watching it, receiving people, allowing people to use that facility? What is likely to happen to that facility in some of our more challenged neighborhoods?
Well, I think the blueprint has already been there. If you look at when Prop 13 hit and we started abandoning parks, the parks didn't just disappear.
Did you say abandoning or abandoning?
Abandoning. We stopped doing programs at parks across the board. Those parks became dark. They became havens. There's going to be some group that's going to fill the void in that community park. If we have positive programming there, it's a positive program. But if we allow it to, if we abandon it, the city, I would venture to say we have an undesirable element go into these parks and start taking them over.
Okay, now, to the CAO. Generically, if we abandon a site in a tough neighborhood, for example, for this scenario, would we inevitably have to use other city financial resources to go back onto that site to perhaps make it a safer facility to help the community get that safety back? Because what I heard Mr. Muckery talking about is basically that might become a site where public safety is now a challenge there, where when it was used as a park, public safety wasn't a challenge. Would we inevitably be having to put other money that we thought we were going to save by closing down that park, just find other monies within our budgets to actually put money back into the neighborhood, unfortunately not to create a safe haven or a park, but just to get the element of unsafety out of there?
That's correct. I think the worst case scenario is where we shift the cost from one department to another department, and in this case, it is cheaper to have a network of services by rec leaders and an army of police officers, and obviously costs to other jurisdictions, to probation and et cetera. That's something that we have to be very careful to prevent.
Thank you for clarifying that, and I'll end with this, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
But the thing is, one thing, again, I complimented these two individuals for their directness. I compliment you, Mr. Muckley, for your directness. I don't always agree with you, but one thing that I can and do appreciate from anybody who serves the public and has to present themselves to people like us is just tell us the truth. Don't tell us what we want to hear. And one of the things I want to take this opportunity right now, ladies and gentlemen, is this. In this city, under the new charter, it is the mayor who gets to hire and fire people, but it is the council who gets to decide if we're going to hire a certain person or if we're going to allow somebody to get fired. And I take this opportunity to say that because the last thing I want to see is this council to allow somebody who's just telling us the truth to be allowed to be fired by anybody in this city and for us to not defend that person on the merits of just doing their job. I want to take that opportunity to remind us it falls with this particular body if somebody deserves to be protected and still deserves to remain in that position to continue to tell us the truth, not what the mayor wants to hear or what we want to hear.
Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Mr. Muckley. I appreciate the direction you've taken and the notion of equity for all the obvious reasons we already heard. But I want to ask Mr. Miller to come to the table. I wanted to, and you folks could stay, we're not.
No.
It's a big party here.
No such luck, Mr. CAO.
I saw that smile right away.
He always has that effect. I know.
Wait a minute.
That was a stage left.
Point of clarification, looks like everybody abandoned the CLA, but the CLA is hired and fired only by the council, right?
Correct,
okay.
correct.
Everyone took a
Hopefully only hired. Yeah, thank you.
All right, that was an exit sign. Well, Mr. Miller, I wanted to, for the record, I've heard this notion that we pulled off 4,000 out of the air, that this 4,000 came out of the blue, that this 4,000 number is made up by this council on a whim, and it's not. And can you just, for the record, just go back to when we started hearing the number 4,000 and what context? The reason why I'm asking is that the impression being made by those assertions is that this council is being rather whimsical and non-responsible and callous to what's happening to our employees, and that's far from the truth. If anything, we're trying to save jobs by avoiding the inevitable if we don't make decisive decisions. So can you please share for the record, when did we hear this 4,000 first and in what context?
Well, certainly. Over the last couple of years, there have been numerous verbal reports to council and discussing, the budget gap and how to address it. But very specifically, in terms of written responses, in a CLA-CO report on December 17th of 2008, we jointly said we were looking at a projected $433 million budget gap for the following year.
So that was about a year ago.
It was a year and a half ago.
Year and a half.
Almost, and a direct quote, in terms of staffing levels, the elimination of over 4,000 filled civilian positions would be necessary to address the $433 million deficit.
And that $433 million has...
Well, correct. That was in December of 2008. In my report to the council on the Finance Committee, Budget and Finance Committee's budget for this year, we were looking at a $326 million deficit at that point. That was the shared sacrifice amount. And we indicated that it could be in excess of 3,000 filled positions that would have to be eliminated to address the civilian portion of the shared sacrifice. Now, obviously, since that time, the sworn portion of the shared sacrifice wasn't met. We've also had a drop in revenues of, about $150 million. So the total of 4,000 figure is, in fact, consistent with what has been out there for the last year and a half.
So within the last year and a half, it's been mentioned and reported to this body on several occasions. So for those who continuously say that this 4,000 is just out of the air, or no matter, or we came up with this number in the last minute, is very disingenuous. And why create that environment? I'm not sure, because it's not constructive towards the progress of creating solutions and allowing us to establish an environment that we can be constructive in saving jobs. Now, the shortfall in revenue, the last report, when did that come in?
The latest was the FSR in January.
And when did that occur? Was that last month? Was it last week?
It was last month, yeah.
Last month. And what was that drop
I believe the drop in revenue was 150 total for the year.
150 million.
Correct.
And we were off by how much, given the previous year's predictions?
On our regular ongoing revenue from the previous year, not including the one-time sweeps from the parking fund and some other things, our revenues were down $300 million from the prior year. So, in essence, as we sit here today, our ongoing revenues are down $450 million from the 08-09 fiscal year.
So the cliff that we came across was a $450 million drop in revenue?
In regular revenues, yes.
And so it's $450 million does not exist, and therefore that 4,000 number becomes that much more real.
Correct, and as Mr. Santana indicated, the 4,000 number total does not address the full gap that we're talking about. Clearly, as he said, going beyond the 4,000 really calls into question whether we can fulfill our core responsibilities, and we have to find other means. But the 4,000 number itself would solve about $300 million in the coming year and about 400 to 430 in the following year.
So, if we're going to move as one body, as one city, working with the mayor in partnership with the unions, these are very real numbers that everyone has to come to grips with in terms of what is not in the account.
Yes, and they're very real numbers, and it's going to take a variety of solutions. Elimination of positions is only one of them, but elimination of positions or reduction in base salaries has to be part of the solution.
And to continue to say that we pulled out this 4,000 out of the air, truly, in my mind, is a very disingenuous statement, and a statement that really leads us to a very antagonistic place that insinuates that this body is being callous and careless with its concerns for its labor force, and that, I believe, is very wrong, and it's something that we need to get away from and be more positive as to what solutions are in front of us and create environments to establish strategies to preserve jobs. And I just want to say that for the record, colleagues, because it's important to understand that 4,000 did not come out of thin air. It's a number that's been around for a year and a half, and the worst case scenario is upon us. And we have to be able to act decisively in establishing strategies that are constructive and hopefully save jobs in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alarcon. And colleagues, we're going to wrap up at 1. We've got 2 other people on the queue, but on this section we're going to wrap up at 1.
Yeah, the issue of the 4,000 isn't whether or not it was plucked out of the air. The issue is the substance of it. The fact is the action taken did not save $1 for the city, and the bond raters recognized that. That's why they downgraded us. The purpose for the 4,000 message was to go to the bond raters and ask them for a reprieve on the notion that we might get downgraded. In fact, they laughed at it because it didn't save the city any money. And so let me ask you this question. If real action would be something like saying we're going to reduce our expenses in the future by X amount by reducing the workforce in this category. So, for example, if we said we are not going to do any more police hiring starting today, wouldn't that have an immediate effect on the bond raters?
Well, it's $2 million in the context of, a $200 million deficit. I think your point's a good one.
$2 million next year?
This year.
Moving forward.
Moving forward, how much?
Because I think the bond rater's statement was relative to next year's budget as much as it was this year's budget. So moving forward, how much would we save?
About $15 million.
$50 million.
15, 1-5.
15 million? But, so 15 million would be a much stronger statement than this pie-in-the-sky notion of 4,000. Because it's real.
I think your point's correct. Actions speak louder than words.
So, those are the kinds of actions that we need to be considering. Those are the kinds of actions that I believe the public is crying out for. Those are the kinds of actions that the bond raters, who I already said I despise, I didn't say that, so let me say that now for the record, but nevertheless, they're the ones holding the gun to our head, and yet we are in a position where we have to take real action. And to say to the general public that we're going to lay off 4,000 workers, and to put the fear of God into 4,000 employees unnecessarily, I think is what is wrong, and that's why I voted against the 4,000. It didn't take any specific action to reduce our budget. It didn't affect the bond rater's conclusions. It didn't suggest specific ways to reduce our budget in a way that was respected. And it didn't deal with the real issues of the real decisions that we're going to have to make. We got to, if we're going to cut our workforce, then why are we hiring police? That's the real issue, and we've got to get past that issue, and we could get past that issue real quick, because I know a majority on this council believe in that, but they're not ready to pull the trigger. If we pull that trigger, I guarantee you it would have a greater effect than this notion of the consternation that we are creating by throwing out a figure of 4,000.
Ms. Hahn, for the third time, and then Mr. Rosendahl for a third time as well.
I was just going to go back to a comment that was made earlier about, I think Dennis made it, about our nonprofits or these other agencies coming in. I think it needs to be very clear if we enter into any kind of an agreement that there's no money that comes with it. I mean, I think that has to be, understood front and center. If the Boys and Girls want to come in, I mean, if there's no money associated with them taking over our facilities. So that's got to be pretty clear. We might, however, want to think of, I know this is a sore subject with a lot of people, is the special events fees, but we might want to maybe think about letting them earn some credits when it comes to the fees that we charge them for their special events, if in fact they are entering into delivering some of the services that we're used to providing. That might be something we look at. And I just want to reiterate that, John Muckery, you said it we do have templates ready to go, MOUs. We have MOUs ready to go, templates to enter into agreements with these agencies to come into our facilities and run programs.
I can do that, and we are working on a template and an MOU. I cannot promise you the other bureaucratic nightmare we're going to go through the city attorney, risk management, and having the liability insurance that we as managers will demand to protect the citizens of LA.
Right. But that's something, Miguel, maybe you can work on to kind of smooth that effort along if this is the direction we're going in. When you bring up the 2008 dire news that we all heard, it seems to me, I remember specifically asking on whether or not a hard hiring freeze at that time was necessary, and I believe I was told no, that was not something that we were looking to do. Looking back, did we hire anybody in the last 2 or 3 years that now looking back we maybe should have had a hard hiring freeze at that point?
Well, very minimal. In essence, there was a hard hiring freeze with the managed hiring process, only revenue-producing and special funded positions, with the exception of, positions that were critical, have been filled for the last year and a half.
And police officers.
I was just going to get to, and the council determined that it wanted to continue to hire police and firefighters.
Okay, just want to make sure that looking back, we shouldn't have maybe instituted a more, rigid hard hiring freeze.
I think I recently saw a chart that looked at it from the last 5 or 6 years. I think if you look at the hiring, most of it occurred before 2008.
The other thing I was going to ask, I know my time's up.
Yep.
Can I just have...
Last 10 seconds.
Okay. I don't know, Tom LaBonge, if you remember, but one of the things I proposed, I think, 5 years ago was an opportunity to allow our residents to add $1 to their DWP bill, which would have raised, I believe, $800 million. Yes, for our parks. And the answer that came back was from our technology folks was we were unable to add an extra line onto the DWP bill to raise that revenue. This might be an opportunity to come back and ask our residents. And I think everything we're saying today is so clear. Parks and recreation is key to making us a livable city. And going down this route of, closing parks, laying off folks, not only graffiti and vandalism, but we're really changing the quality of life for people who live in Los Angeles and probably are already having a tough time at homes. I'd like to bring back that opportunity to ask LA residents if they would like to save our parks by adding $1 to their every other month DWP bill voluntarily, if that would be something they would agree to do. So it's an opportunity. Could you look into that?
Mr. Gregorian is our next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I just want to respond briefly to Mr. Reyes's points, many of which I agree with wholeheartedly. I think the need to address this year's budget deficit and next year's budget deficit right now, aggressively and forthrightly, is imperative, and I agree wholeheartedly that that is going to require reduction in the number of positions that we have funded. I believe that there's absolutely no way, with the magnitude of the budget that we're facing, that we're going to be able to escape that reality. But if there was a suggestion that a vote against the move from 1,000 to 4,000 layoffs last week is in some way disingenuous, I do feel the need to respond to that because that word was used twice. My concern was the fact that for at least a month now, we've been asking our staff to prepare for 1,000 layoffs. We've been asking them to meet the almost impossible task of creating lists, processing them, and then changing our minds and saying, but before you do any of that, let's be sure to move as many of them as we can into other positions. And then, without any real advance notice, we say, take all that back, now start working on 4,000 layoffs. Now, if it's true that this number has been talked about for a year and a half, then respectfully I would suggest that perhaps steps should have been taken over the course of the last year and a half to address this problem, instead of in the first 24 hours after we get a letter from a bond rating agency. And if that were the case, then by all means, this council and the mayor could have gotten to work a lot earlier on trying to address those positions and create the efficiencies and to go after the revenue sources and the other things to try to minimize this impact. But my vote, I can't speak for others, my vote on that proposal was based on process, was based on the fact that this was reactionary, this was responsive, and wasn't proposed by the CAO, wasn't a proposal that came through the Budget Committee, but was a proposal that was done on the fly in the course of a single day's meeting of the Council. Now, does that mean that these cuts won't be necessary? I don't believe so. I think they will be necessary. I think position reductions will be necessary. But I think, in order for us to be on the same page with our own staff and with the mayor and building a consensus vision for how we advance forward with a smaller city government than the one we have now, we need to do that through collaborative effort and not through sudden zigzagging changes. That was the reason for my vote.
Ms. Perry, and then Mr. Rosendahl.
Thank you, Mr. President. The decision that we made last week was not made on a zigzag, on the fly. We were in closed session. I'm not going to go into the details of what occurred in closed session. I'm certainly not going to stand here quietly and allow those words to have power because they're incorrect. Now, some people just got here. It's like a bus station. Some people may be leaving. Some people are just arriving. Not everybody got here at the same time. Not everybody heard the same information. We've been talking about this for almost 2 years now. Mr. Santana is a new addition, and grateful for that. Mr. Miller and Ms. So have been fighting this battle and speaking the truth for quite a while, and not being listened to at every turn, and so it's no surprise that we're in the situation that we're in. But to say, and I don't want to go back and forth, Mr. Gregorian, I respect you. I know you're a very intelligent man, highly educated, and very experienced, but that was not a decision that was made on the fly. And I want to say this publicly so that people hear that. This is my truth. I do not believe that decision was made on the fly. I believe that decision was based on good, sound advice from our administrative officers, our financial analysts inside the city, and my only hope is that we haven't acted too late. but at least we acted definitively. Thank you.
Mr. Rosendahl.
Thank you, Mr. President. And really, you're great and you're a new addition, but the truth is, we've been wrestling around with this for quite a while, and the rubber hit the road this time. Can I ask John Muckery quickly to come up for a quick second here? Let's talk about volunteers doing what some of the paid people who will be leaving us going to do. For instance, I got a little email from Tom Ponton, and you know Tom. He's an amazing guy in the district, and he just talked about ways in which we could work with community. Mar Vista Park is a model for me of community involvement. Can we set up a volunteer program now, anticipating termination of employees where volunteers can jump in?
It's a sticky question. You should know already we have 13,000 registered volunteers in the Department of Recreation and Parks. And the reason that's critical is every volunteer has to be fingerprinted and background checked. I would not want volunteers to take over city employees' jobs at this time.
Okay, but they can assist some city employees under the direction of city employees.
No, there's no question. With 13,000, we depend on our volunteers.
Okay, next thing is naming rights. We got the great skateboard park at Venice Beach. There's been discussions about it. Obviously, we need money to patrol Venice Beach when we start losing staff in July from Rec and Park. Are we closer to the naming rights strategy? And from Miguel Santana's point of view, revenue streams from naming rights? Do you have any sense of any of that?
Again, the Department of Recreation and Parks is aggressively seeking naming rights at all our facilities. That revenue stream, we want to stay in the department. And it could be used to offset costs in and around the facilities for security and the like. And we just had a naming rights ordinance that came before the council in which Rec and Parks was excluded from that at being a semi-proprietary.
Can Mr. Santana, can we get a report back on all the naming rights strategies and revenue potential streams of where they are? Guys like Barry Sanders who do it and others have been doing it, not just Rec and Park, but other departments. Sure. Be great. Thank you.
Mr. Krikorian and then Mr. Reyes. And that'll take us past the 1 o'clock. I know Ms. Hani just pressed her button as well. Okay. Mr. Reyes? Ms. Hahn?
It's actually 800,000, I believe, that we would bring in by that dollar.
Yeah, I was doing the calculation.
I know. I just want to bring in so much money to the city that I'm just adding extra zeros. Still, it's a good idea, and I'd like for us to look at that. I saw some interesting faces between the two of you when John said on the naming rights he'd like for that money to stay within the department. Is that something that would happen, could happen? Is that what we're looking at for naming rights, or are we looking for this money to go into our general fund?
Well,
I mean, let's speak the truth.
I believe Mr. Miller may say that is a policy decision for the council to make.
We were actually talking about the goats. He was
we were
the story. We could name the
naming rights for the goats.
In the final analysis, clearly it is the council's decision. As Mr. Muckery said, there is a minimum by the charter. There is a general fund subsidy. There are the related costs and other issues. And again, this is a horrible time. So at the end of the day, the more money that they can generate, the better off they will be. But what ultimately happens to the whole is going to be up to you.
Okay.
I just want to put one figure out. I know that you've been here a long time. Every $1 million equates to roughly 17 employees in the Departments of Recreation and Parks. 1 million, 17 employees.
All right, for the last minute, Mr. Cardenas, for a single minute.
Thank you. With this last minute before 1 o'clock, before we move off this item, I just wanted to, again, point out, I believe it's Mr. Muckery's responsibility to give his opinion. If we, for example, give naming rights, it's his opinion and his responsibility to say, if that's an identified revenue source, I would like that to stay with the department. For obviously, if we decide as a policy-making body it should stay with the department, obviously if we agree that the department should be fortified with those funds so that we can keep our parks open, etc., so that we can actually utilize these facilities appropriately. Again, I think it's appropriate for people to say what's on their mind if they feel strongly about it, if they think it's good policy, recommendation for the policymakers. Again, That's what we hire you for. So thank you for interjecting that way. Even though you know that some people might not like it, it's your job to tell us the best answers you feel you have based on your expertise and your responsibility of running your department. Thank you.
Thank you. That'll take us to 1 o'clock. So, Mr. LeBons, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut off the conversation for now. We do have 13. Mr. Cardenas is asked to put off till Thursday. If there's no objection, we'll continue that till Thursday. No, I said I announced a couple times about a half hour ago that we're going to end our debate at 1 o'clock. We do have a couple of speaker cards, but then we're going to move on to the next topic. There's no action on these items today.
Mr. President, you did have cards on number 14, and
Correct.
item 10 is an action item, actually.
That's right. I'm sorry, 10 is, my apologies. 10 is continuing to process the ERIP. Number 14 has Miriam Fogler and Van Nuys, and then Donna Pearman. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, well, you guys can run the meeting any way you want. I tell you, we have a human error here, a human problem. And that's you, the politicians. We need politician repair, not California repair. Do not sign that petition, folks. They want to put in a parliamentary system. Then they'll come down here and change things worse for us here, taking away rights. They'll set California back 100 years, folks. They want to change the term limits to make it more flexible for them to stay in office. So, folks, you're just helping give more incumbents more power and taking away from the voters. Okay, next thing, I can't afford a pay cut, Mr. Rosendahl. Just like your constituent says, well, then bring the money back from the CRA. They said at their last week's meeting they don't want to subsidize the city's deficit, but listen, if I'm telling you, the NRA knows about what's going on here in the city and the state. I told them what you people are trying to do is change the state government. You can't win, because I already on top of this, and I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to behoove us and trick us into voting away our rights. Okay, you can't do that. And the CRA and the UN, we have a challenge with them trying to take away gun rights too. I know what you're up to, and I know the CRA is behind the books too, trying to do what they can not to give back any money back to the city. That's our money, folks. And they're a private company. They should be only using private money. And all that building downtown should have been stopped. Ernie Bernardi, for 20 years was here stopping that. He put a cap, $2.4 million. He put a cap on them. Stop the spending now. No, get off the backs of the workers. No.
Thank you. Donna Pearman is our next speaker. Also in Van Nuys. After that is Dr. Clyde Williams here in Council Chambers.
Hi, I'm Donna. I think a fair way to save those jobs would be to ask everyone, even politicians, to put a quarter-cent sales tax to be put to cities to say for city services. That way, it's equal across the board. Everyone uses city services. It's a better way to use sales tax and the other things they misuse our money on, the sales tax. You use the service, you pay for it. Everyone uses city services. I've dare to fight anyone who doesn't use city services. No layoffs. And only make it worse where they have to give them handouts, unemployment, food stamps, subsidy. Better they give the money for hard work rather than subsidizing unemployed former city employees. And I think that the mayor should do teleconference instead of all this traveling around like Social Security does teleconference. When he chooses to ask for money to Los Angeles, he can also do texting afterwards. I think that's a big waste of money. We need to be able to rein in and not spend so much money. It's the city, the CRA, 58 council projects. Oh no, I forgot also it was 150 million for the river, not 1.5 million. That's way too much money. We wouldn't have this deficit problem if the city council wouldn't be continually spending all our money. We don't need to do these layoffs. These are people who need to have their jobs. And please, Mr. Rosendahl, Miriam Vogler can't afford to have her husband do furlough. Please help us. No pay cuts.
Dr. Clyde Williams is our next speaker, and then Arnold Sachs will follow.
Item 14, cost savings. Quite easy. Have the same shared sacrifice that the public is encountering right now. 15% unemployment. How about 15% layoffs? How about those sections of the general fund which are not sharing the sacrifice? The police and fire departments, where are they? All of these elements. Now we want volunteers to replace various peoples. By the way, the neighborhood councils has around 90,000 hours a year of volunteerism. That's not included, apparently. In addition to those things where we actually have projects in the field that include streets, include parks, include planting. All of this on volunteer basis already. Now you're wanting more volunteers, but how can you support more volunteers if you're going to do away with the neighborhood council system, which tends to organize those volunteers to do things that the neighborhoods really want, rather than reallocating your street furniture revenues from one fund to another fund to support various people within the district offices. So, what is this volunteerism? We're already sacrificing. And I say to ask for more before you touch the police and fire department. So I would highly recommend that you include in the next year's budget some cuts in the other unsacrificed departments. And by the way, it should not be just for next year's budget, but you should include the projected budgets for the next 3, maybe 4 years. And after the $1 billion one, I think you'll find it's even larger. Thank you.
Thank you. Arnold Sachs is our last speaker on item 14.
Yes, thank you. Arnold Sachs. Two things. Clarification, I believe Miguel Santana, maybe I'm wrong, but somebody mentioned that taking a 10% cut on contracts, getting a 10% cut on contracts would benefit the city on all the contracts. But it isn't all the contracts because it doesn't include the labor contracts so far. That's a big part of getting, you heard if you get 10% of the labor contracts, that would equate to $300 million. Don't see that happening, probably won't. And number two, there was some discussion regarding taking action, and that the number 4,000 came up in a December 2008 hearing. Well, in 2008 December, you'd have been talking about the 2007-2008 budget. And that's the clarification that needs to be made, because the budgets are being discussed, like you're balancing the 2009-2010 budget this year. This is 2010 in the calendar year. So in the calendar year 2008, December, you'd have been discussing the 2007-2008 budget. So you didn't act then. You didn't act on the 2008-2009 budget. And now you have the 2009-2010 budget. So for 2.5 years, the other question asked the CEO is, if you had acted and cut 500 positions, let's say, in 2007-2008, would you still be looking at a forecasted budget of $400 million deficit? Or would the lessening of those expenses, including the pensions and everything that goes along with it, would that have lowered the overall deficit that you're facing now? Would that be the same as increasing the revenue? Because that's what you needed to do, is act. And you didn't. Nobody acted at all. So you weren't zigzagging or going loop-to-loop. You were just sinking like a stone.
That'll be the last comment for item 14. We do have amendment to, let's take these separately if we may.
Mr. President, on item 14, do you wish to continue that 1 week?
Yes, let's continue 14 without objection 1 week till Tuesday. Mr. Smith wanted to move on 10, was it?
On number 10, we're receiving files since those issues have been answered.
Okay, without objection. 13 I already did. Yep. And then on item
7, was there an amendment you said, Mr.?
No, there was no action on that.
So no action required on number 7 either. But that will take us to next items called special. If we can take up 11 next. We'll come back in 2 seconds.
11 was called special for cards.
We have a card, and I'd like to amend the date to the March 20th is a Saturday, to make that March 22nd, or the earliest available date for the mayor. Item 11, Dr. Clyde Williams. He passes. With that, let's go ahead and open the roll as amended, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
12 ayes.
Number 9, Dr. Williams, you're the first speaker. And then Mr. Sachs.
Shared sacrifice. Sorry, Dr. Clyde Williams, 4115 Barrett Road, El Sereno, Northeast LA. Shared sacrifice. What happened to that concept? Again, the public is sharing the sacrifice. They've already sacrificed first. What? So, trying to get there. Usually you don't have a problem. But anyway, where does the ERIP stand in this shared sacrifice? Sworn pension plans. Wow. What's going to happen? It's going to be a mess. Not this year, maybe. Maybe we'll sacrifice a lot this year, maybe some more next year, but pretty soon there won't be anything left to sacrifice. So where will the pension funds be? Where will they be if the stock market doesn't come back? Where will everything be? We are not being told what's going to happen. The CAO did give us a 3-year projection. It wasn't very pleasant. So why not project what the real structural deficit's going to be, especially with all the early retirements, and get on with real informed consent of the public? Maybe we need a tax increase. Wow. $1,000 per parcel per year for the next 4 or 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Arnold Sachs is our next speaker. Will be followed by Miriam Fogler in Van Nuys.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Arnold Sachs. Echoing on that, the comments made by Dr. Williams, you heard discussions earlier regarding Me Too colas. Shared sacrifice, Me Too colas. It's all about me, me, me. What about these pensions? You know, in the environmental recovery meeting that you had on Friday, when Mr. Alarcon was asking questions regarding, is it wise to consider positions that generate revenue to be cut? I asked a question regarding those positions that generate revenue. What about positions that are created through grants, grant funding, where you do hiring? And I said, well, if you get grant funding, are the benefits paid for? And it doesn't make sense that they would be. Because if you get federal or state grant funds and they pay for the salaries, if they paid for the benefits, then those positions would in fact be either federal or state positions, because they'd be paying the full load. So if you get a grant funding and you're only paying the salary, then who's paying the benefits? Who's paying the retirement funds? Who's paying the cost of health care? Which is another situation. You have this wonderful living wage ordinance. When do you start deciding to consider health benefits being put on the table? That you hear Anthem and all these health concerns have to raise their rates because the cities and the employees of the government are getting coverage that the public is paying for. When do they start to add to the pot?
Thank you, Mr. Sachs. Miriam Fogler is our last speaker on number 9.
Well, I'd like to respond to Mr. Sachs. What about GM? What about them? They're a private company, and they have the same thing as the city of Los Angeles. They have health care, they have retirement. What about doing something about them? A fair wage? Baloney. They get more money than we make down here, I'll tell you that. Matter of fact, it's more insecure because it looks like the federal government had helped GM more than helping the city of Los Angeles, Mr. Sachs. Secondly, and also consolidation is the fact here that you're talking about grants and revenue-generated jobs. Well, my husband had a revenue-generated job that's specially funded, and only 5% comes into the general fund, and he likes to be cut off from that and be put in with the Department of Water and Power, merge his sanitation with water and power, would save substantial savings for the city of Los Angeles. Probably about $200 million right there, folks. Merging two departments, probably even more than that. Why isn't there even being done something about that instead of being doing and done, which is important for neighborhood councils. But the fact of the matter is, we need to consolidate. And it's high time that sanitation and water and power become a collective companies together, a proprietary. Because after all, they are using the same water. I think it's an outrage. And, you know, if you want to know this, you won't have any engineers. You won't have anybody, professionals, going to school, coming working here in the city. You cut their pay. And cut their health care benefits. You don't want to have people who are trained. These are not people who are working at McDonald's jobs, Mr. Sachs, fair wage jobs that like working at the airports, just cleaning and doing janitorial. They're making a lot. They're doing, their jobs are not the same kind of labor that the people working here. They're skilled. Those are very low skilled jobs.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fogler. That'll end our public comment on this item. Mr. Rosendahl, you're up.
Yes, just thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to put, and we've already circulated, Mr. Smith and Mr. Corrett's second motion on 9. It's called 9A, and a friendly amendment instructs the CAO to include in its March 10th, 2010 report to the City Council various scenarios of adjusting civilian and sworn employee pension contribution levels up to the amount necessary for sustainability and the estimated impact that potential incremental adjustments would have on the recommendations in the 3-year plan to fiscal sustainability. We put this friendly amendment in there, Mr. President, because as we do the 3-year plan, we really need to see what effect the pensions have on what we call forever the structural deficit. So I just put that forward.
Thank you. Without objection, we'll accept that amendment as a friendly one. With that, let's go ahead and open the roll then, unless anybody else wants to be heard on 9. Close the roll and tabulate the vote.
12 ayes.
That is approved. We have item 12, if we can continue that until March 4th, which is our revenue day that we'll be having here. Without objection, we'll continue that till then. We do have a special item before us. Mr. City Attorney, I think Ms. Hahn, did you want to make the findings on the urgency of the special 1 and how that came to our attention after the posting of the agenda?
Yes, colleagues, this is a very serious issue having to do with 574 miners in Boron, California that have been locked out of their work. The mine is Rio Tinto Borax in Kern County, but many of these are they're ILWU jobs that these miners are involved in. So after the posting of our last agenda, we found out that there is going to be a major rally and a meeting in Dodger Stadium tomorrow with other miners in support of these workers. This is about putting people back to work. This is about good paying jobs. And I thought it would be important if we took a position as the City Council urging immediate resolution of these problems.
Thank you. On the findings, if we can open the roll, close the roll and tabulate the vote.
City Attorney.
Sometimes the City Attorney will make the findings and other times members will make the findings. Okay. Please open the roll, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
11 ayes, 1 no.
Those findings are found. We have the item before us. Ms. Hahn?
Again, this is about an urgent matter to put 574 people back to work. These are tough jobs. There are folks who live in Los Angeles. They're bused to Boron, California, to mine in the Rio Tinto Borax company. It's mine, and I just think this is something that we in Los Angeles just want to take an opportunity to say we are supporting you, we are behind you. We hope that you can work out these negotiations so that you can get back to work. This is a time when we talk about people having jobs, talk about people going back to work. It's an opportunity for the City of Los Angeles to stand behind them and say, we hope this can be worked out so you can get back to work, the business can continue to make money, and we can have an economic development renewal in this particular industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
The attorney on the findings, how can this be an item that's been going on since November, just came to our attention that we need to act? And secondly, this is not in the city of L.A. It's not a function of the city of L.A. I know many of you love to just support the unions whenever they scream and yell, but this is not a function of city government. It's a waste of our time, quite frankly. But I want to, on the findings, how do you make a ruling that was something that came to the agenda after the close of the last agenda that requires city action, considering that there's no action to be taken at a rally?
I had a question as to whether one of the two findings was able to be met regarding the subsequently arising need. Ms. Hahn addressed that in her statement, that since the posting of the agenda, it came to her attention. So that's why I didn't state the findings, because I didn't feel comfortable stating that particular finding. There is an urgency, and it has to be underscored that what the council is doing today is urging both parties to resolve this matter, not to stand behind one party or the other. It's to urge both parties to resolve this matter.
Right. Thank you. And by the way, it's up to us to vote on whether or not we can make the findings. We already voted on that. So again, these are workers in Los Angeles. These are workers in Los Angeles. They might not be working in Los Angeles, but they are ILWU workers. They live in our communities. They're bused there every day. We just want to support the resolution so that we can put people back to work and the business can continue to operate. Thank you.
Mr. Zine?
I want to support you on this. I'd like to know what the dispute is. Working conditions, salary, benefits. Do we know what the dispute between the workers and the union is?
You know, I'm sure it's like any other contract negotiations. There's issues about all that you just said.
Have they been locked out?
And they've been locked out. So that's what we're urging. We've done this before. We've urged both sides to get together. It's the City of Los Angeles saying both sides work this out. We're not taking sides. We just know there's 574 people, many of them, again, who live in our communities. They're bused to this mine. This is no easy job. This is tough work. We just are saying, we're behind you, work it out, and let's put people back to work.
Okay.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, let's go ahead and open the roll. Please close the roll and tabulate the vote.
11 ayes, 1 no.
That is approved. Next order of business, please.
Council has motions for posting and referral.
Those are posted and referred.
There are a number of excuses on the desk for a variety of dates and times by council members Cardenas, Weezer, Koretz, Parks, Reyes, Smith, Zine, and Garcetti, all of which meet council policy.
Okay. Those excuses are granted. Mr. Parks?
And that would clear the desk.
I'm sorry. Can we have Mr. Parks' mic, please?
Could I have a reconsideration on 9 so we can coordinate a couple of CF numbers that will come in with that March 10th?
Let's go ahead and open the roll to reconsider item 9. Close the roll and tabulate the vote.
12 ayes.
Okay, Mr. Parks?
I'd like to add that when we come forward on this motion for March the 10th, that the CAO also is prepared to address Council File Number 091123, which is dealing with reform of pensions in which the 3 pension systems has responded to, and then also 09-0952, which is response by the 3 pension systems regarding the League of Women Voters report.
Without objection, let's prepare the roll as amended and tabulate the vote.
12 ayes.
That is approved. Desk is clear. Do we have any announcements, colleagues? Not. Do we have any adjourning motions today? There are no adjourning motions. Mr. Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Cardenas, Hahn, Koretz, Krikorian, Labange, Parks, Perry, Reyes, Rosendahl, Smith, Zine, Garcetti.
We'll next be in session tomorrow. That's Wednesday at 10 a.m. We'll see you here. Have a good day. This meeting of Los Angeles City Council is hereby adjourned.